IB Nation, Notre Dame fans, welcome back to the big show. We are back. It's Thursday, February 27th. That's Trevor Trowbridge. I'm Brian Driscoll, and we are going to talk about breakouts, Trevor. We've talked about breakouts before. We're going to talk about breakouts again. We're going to take a little different angle on the breakout conversation today. We're also going to do a daily mailbag at the end of this segment. So if you have some questions, go ahead and get them thrown into the chat. We already have 3 of them in there that we have starred already to answer. A couple from Iden Benami. Jared Rhodes already has one in. If you have a question, just go ahead and put an MB on there or a mailbag a mailbox emoji, and we'll know that you have a question for us. And we will answer those, any of those at the end of the show. We'll go for at least an hour on those and have some fun. So if you have some questions, you have some things you want to say or you want us to talk about and address, go ahead and throw those in there. But Trevor Trowbridge, today, my friend, we're talking about breakout players for Notre Dame. And we're going to go a little bit of a different angle. You know, we kind of did a brief breakout conversation when we talked about the 25 season right after the 24 season ended. We'll have another dive into that as we get, maybe post-spring. I think we've kind of talked a lot about breakouts for the spring. We'll have some written stuff. I'm sure there'll be some different aspects. We'll dive into that. But what I want to talk about today, Trevor, are breakouts that are more so not predicted as much as needed. And so what we're going to have a conversation today is we're going to look at both sides of the ball. And we're going to say, what are the 2 players that you believe a breakout is most needed for this offense or defense to really take a jump? It can be an individual player. It can be a position where you need someone at position X to step up and play. Actually, I should say unnamed position, because X is actually a position. It's the boundary receiver. But this particular position, you need someone to step up because it's important for insert reasons. It could be a group of guys. These types of players, these guys all have a unique skill set. They provide something. You need one of them to break out. And then why those needs are so important. So we actually kind of both came up with our list of 2 on offense and 2 on defense, and they were both different. So we're going to both kind of explain the ones that we have, and kind of why those are. And it's not going to be like a debate thing like we did on Tuesday, because it's not that kind of, well, this is why mine's more important than yours. It's just your perspective on why you think these are important. I'll give mine on my particular players. I think we're in agreement on all 4 on each side of the ball. It's just looking at it from different points of view. And so I'm going to have some fun doing that. We'll do defense first, Trev, and then we'll go to the offense, and then we'll do our mailbag. So this is going to be fun. I know that the coaches talked yesterday. We heard Chris Ash and Jawan Sider talk. So what we figured we could do is, if you guys want to hear our thoughts on specific things they said or in general comments about it, go ahead and just ask us questions for the mailbag. Go ahead and get mailbag questions in, specifically kind of what you want our thoughts on what they said. We both listened to the press conference. Trevor transcribed it. I listened to it last night as well. And so we'll have, I have a lot of thoughts on it, and, whatever you guys want to hear about it, we'll talk about that in the mailbag. So go ahead and get those questions in. But Mr. Trowbridge, without further ado, we're going to kick things off with talking about breakout players, and to set the stage for the overall conversation before we dive into the specifics of both sides of the ball. What we're looking at here are breakouts to any level. And we've said before, breakouts can really be on 3 levels. Number 1 is a guy that just never played or had very little snaps or meaningful snaps last season, that jumps into a really key rotation role. Doesn't have to necessarily be a guy that becomes like a star, but a guy that goes from not having played to being an impactful player. An example of that for the 24 season would be Jaden Alsbury. Didn't, redshirted in 2023. Came out last year. Don't know that he started a single game last season. Was not the best linebacker, but he was very productive. That is a breakout, a guy that went from not having played to a very key rotation spot. There are guys who maybe were starters or rotation guys that become, good starters, or I should say maybe rotation guys that become quality starters. Maybe they were, played a little bit, didn't necessarily play a ton. They step into the role and they become impactful players. And so, we could look at different players that Notre Dame had in that regard this past season. It could be Emil Wagner would be one that'd be kind of similar to what like Jaden Alsbury was. You never played, becomes a really important starter. He'd be more of that. He's more of that second level guy where he was more of a backup in 2023, becomes an starter, a pretty important starter this past season. Not necessarily a star, but a good football player. And then there's some guys that go from the bottom to the top. Those where a guy like a Don Schuler, who not only went from not playing much in 2023 to difference maker in 2024. Drake Bowen would be a guy like that second category that I'm talking about where, Don went from nothing to something. Drake was a rotation guy in 2023. Didn't play a ton, played a lot on special teams, and he became a really impact starter. Whereas like a Don went from hardly playing at all to impact player. And then there's the guys that have like the big breakouts, the guys that become star players or real big difference makers at some point in time in the season. And so we're gonna kind of, you can include any of those, and they can all fall into the category. We're gonna talk about it. We want to hear your guys' all you guys and gals' opinion as well. We're gonna do defense first, but number one, what do you think of our breakout players, and does that matter? Do you think it can have an impact? And then also, who do you guys think are the most important? And so it's not just, and here's the one caveat: no quarterbacks today. We're going to leave quarterback conversation for a different time, but it's more so which ones are needed for this team to have the biggest impact. So if Aeneas Williams has a breakout, that's awesome. It's great. If Jadarian Price has a breakout, that's awesome. That's great, but it doesn't necessarily move the needle at that position, right? I mean, if a Don Schuler goes from really good to really, really good, that's great, but that's not something that like, oh my gosh, this team isn't going to reach their full potential if, that doesn't happen, right? It's more so what are the ones that are going to have the greatest impact on this team achieving its full potential, and each unit to achieving its full potential. So, and that's kind of, that's kind of where we're coming from on this. We're trying to look at it from more of a need standpoint than just predicting insert really good player who's going to become, like Leonard Moore's not a guy we're going to talk about today, because we both anticipate Leonard Moore being a breakout player this year. Kind of was a breakout player last year. He's getting preseason All-American honors, but like him becoming an All-American this year is just kind of a continuation of what he's already done. It's a position they're already strong at. And I don't know that it moves the needle per se. They went to the championship game with Christian Gray and Leonard Moore already playing a certain level. Breakouts are nice, makes them better, but it's not needed per se for this team to be really good. And so we're going to talk about that and look at it from more of a need standpoint. I think that's what's going to make this a little bit different than maybe some of the other breakout conversations. And so, and you guys can follow along with our criteria, or you can go with whatever you want. We just want to kind of hear what your guys' thoughts are on breakout players. So, Trev, we're going to start off with the Notre Dame defense. And this is a side of the ball that is really intriguing, because there's almost kind of like this expectation that they're just going to keep cruising along. A lot of guys coming back. Yes, you've got a new D coordinator, but the rest of your staff is back. There's this assumption that Marcus Freeman's going to just, he's the head coach, so the defense is going to continue to be good. And that all sounds fine, and that's great. And we kind of believe that to a degree as well for 2025. But in order for that to happen, we both believe that there are certain players or position groups that really have to play better or provide something beyond what they provided last season in order for this to actually happen. Now, we both expect it to happen, but it's dependent upon certain things kind of taking, a step, players taking a step. And so that's what we're going to focus on first is really looking at this defense and saying, what are the four players, the two players each? What are the players whose emergence is most important to this defense? A, minimum maintaining what they were, or B, potentially even being better on defense in 2025. And so I'm going to let you start off with who your first player is, Trevor. Tell me who it is, and let's dive into why that breakout is so important.
For me, when we talked about this before the show started, I went with an entire position group, but through thinking about it, I've kind of whittled it down to one person. And to me, that's Bryce Young on the edge. I was originally going to go with an edge player in general, but the more I sat down and I thought about it, Bryce Young, of the players that played a good amount of snaps last year, starter level snaps ish, because there were points in the season where RJ Oben would be the starter. Bryce Young would end up with more snaps than him at the end of any given game, especially towards the latter half of the season. And then I went through and I looked at it, and of those players not named Boubacar Traore, who's coming back off of injury, I believe that Bryce Young has the highest ceiling of those guys, of Junior Tuihalamaka, of a Josh Burnham. Even though those ceilings are still high, I think Bryce Young, with his frame and how many snaps he got at such a young age, provides such a needed element to this edge rushing defense that it just hasn't had in a while. Javonte Jean-Baptiste did a pretty good job in 2023. We started to see hints of an edge presence with Boubacar Traore, Jordan Botelho this past season, until unfortunately their seasons got cut short. Neither of them made it past 5 games played because Boubacar got injured middle way, if that, against Louisville. So for me, I look at this in a couple of different ways. One, I think it's really easy for fans specifically, myself included in this, to say, well, if Boubacar comes back healthy, then Notre Dame's D-line is good. It's like, well, what if he comes back not at the same level as he was on September 28th against Louisville? What if it takes him some time to get back into the swing of that? Which could very well be the case.
And it would be totally natural and understandable. And
absolutely. Common. Absolutely. And so when you're going through spring, Boubacar's now 6 months removed from his knee injury. Same with Jordan Botelho. And so I would be shocked if they're doing any sort of live drills 6 months removed from an ACL knee injury. But in that time, you need other players to step up. And yes, the reason why I started out with position groups, the position group first, is one of Junior Tuihalamaka, Josh Burnham, a Logan Thomas. One of those guys absolutely could fit into that rotation. But for me, I look at Bryce Young, with him having the highest ceiling, him having the physical tools to be not only a great pass rusher, but a really good edge run defender as well. He's somebody for me that I sit back and look at. This is a guy where what he did freshman year, just based on raw talent alone, his skill set shined. He had a sack against Curtis Rourke in the first round of the playoff. You know, he had some block kicks. So the athleticism shined, but we're going to need to see more of that on a consistent basis. And that starts in the spring. I love to start having these conversations. You know, like as soon as the season ends, you start talking about, man, it'd be cool if this guy could step up and do this. And man, wouldn't it be nice if, you know, player A goes crazy in the spring or player B shows what we believe that he can show. But Bryce Young is a guy, when you start talking about a need, they need an additional presence on the edge to complement Boubacar coming back, to complement Jordan Botelho coming back. I love Logan Thomas's ceiling, but when we're talking about snaps and who played more snaps and who had more pass rushing snaps, it's Bryce Young by a pretty big margin. So starting out for me, that's where it's at. Their edge rushing presence, it wasn't fully there with consistency last season, not due to talent per se, but some of it due to experience, a lot of it having to do with injuries. So Bryce Young, for me, is the first player on defense that really needs to step up this spring and say, hey, I'm here, I've arrived. Regardless of when these two other guys come back and the development of the other people, I'm going to take charge and really hone in on my development to be a key piece on that defense, Brian.
Can I ask you a question on that, Trevor? When you look at the spring, what is the level of what would be evidence to you that Bryce is starting to take that? Because this was asked of me in the receivers article. What are you going to see? I wrote an article about the sophomore receivers at Irish Breakdown, and it was about how they're going to have a chance to break out and the impact that they could have. And the question was, well, what like with Cam Williams, what will it mean for you to see that you're saying breakout is coming? What were the things that you're going to be looking for from Bryce, and what's the minimum level of performance or production that you need to see to say, like, there's different types of breakouts for a guy like Bryce, right? One is he becomes, he was a good flashy player, becomes more steady. The other one is he becomes a difference maker. The third one is like he becomes like a dude, which is what we think ultimately he becomes. Maybe not 25, we'll see. But like, what's the minimum of what you need to see from him? First of all, what's it look like? And then what's the minimum you need to see from him to say, okay, Bryce has taken that step?
Yeah, for me, it comes down to consistency. That is a huge thing for me because, to your point, we saw the flashes from him. So in the spring, it's him being constantly disruptive. When you're going through and you're looking at practice, barring any number change, you see number 30 in the backfield more plays than not. It's not you go through an entire team period and once in a while, do you see that play that Bryce Young made? That's, gosh, man, he's just in the backfield again. Man, he set the edge really well again. So for him, it's that level of consistency. It's going to be a huge thing for me this spring because Notre Dame has a talent at every position on this team to have great impact players, difference makers, which is Bryce Young is one of those players that we believe to get there at some point. But for me, it's the consistency, that level of consistency from him specifically. Because one, not only is that going to help his development, I think that's going to help the other players' development as well. You have a guy like a Josh Burnham or a junior Tui Alamakasi and a kid that's younger than them. And gosh, man, he is just tearing it up every play, every drill, every team run, every insert practice drill here. So bare minimum for me, that's what it looks like. Just consistency, consistent disruption in the pass rush and in the run game.
I think if he really steps up as a pass rusher, I think that could be something that would be huge as well. And I also feel like if one of those two has to step up as an impact pass rusher, and I feel like if Bryce steps up as an impact pass rusher, that takes a little bit of the pressure off of Josh to be that guy, and Josh can be more of that impact run guy. I mean, it was what you're talking about the Indiana game and the pressure, but I mean, Josh had a huge play, first play of the game. There are about 3 or 4 plays that Josh was really good there. You think of that tackle for loss against Penn State. Like, that's just where Josh has been pretty good so far. And you'd like to have a little bit more of a complementary piece to that group, in my opinion. That's just kind of my 2 cents on that. I just feel like that would be something that would be super impactful, for that duo to make me feel like, okay, they're really stepping up, and I'm seeing some real impact production from that duo. You and I kind of had a couple thoughts along a similar lines, Trev, when you talk about the defensive line. I'm going to stay on the defensive line for my first one, and I have an individual player in mind, and it's Gabriel Rubio. And when I look at the defensive ends, we broke them down a lot last week, Trev. We talked about how important they are. You need Bryce to step up. You need Josh Burnham to take his game to another level. The exciting thing is kind of feel this way about receivers too, but we started to see some flashes from guys who didn't do certain things during the regular season or any consistency. So you hope that they can build on that. But the big thing for me is you can't take a big step back at defensive tackle. I expect there to be some, maybe early in the season, potential for a step back based on how they were in November. But what you can't see is a step back from where you were in the postseason. You've got to be better than what you were in the postseason. And because in the postseason, like, we're thinking, well, you can't. It's unfair to ask Gabriel Rubin those guys to replace, Howard Cross and Riley Mills. Well, I'm not asking them to replace November version of Riley Mills or Howard Cross. I'm asking them to be better than what January version of Howard Cross was. And we didn't see Riley Mills in January. You know what I mean? So it's like, I needed to be better than what it was against Georgia and Penn State, especially Penn State and Ohio State. Because I thought the D tackles were like, I thought Gabriel Rubio was my pick here. And I thought he's pretty good against Georgia for the most part. But the thing with Gabriel is that he's shown so many flashes of being a difference maker that it almost kind of gets frustrating sometimes when he doesn't play with the consistency that he's capable of and doesn't have the impact that he's capable of. Because for 3 years now, we've seen flashes of him where at moments you're like, dude, that was a really impressive play. That's the former top 100 recruit that we all remember. That's the guy that had like 20 sacks as a senior that we remember. Like, that's the guy we thought we were getting. That's the guy that won MVP honors at Notre Dame's lineman camp when he was coming out of high school. Like, that's what I remember about. That's what we thought Gabriel Rubio was going to be. And he's never quite been that player. Now, he's obviously been good for Notre Dame. He's been a key rotation player now for 3 seasons. This will be, 4th season. And third, he's a really important cog to this. But a couple things from Gabriel. Number one is he hasn't been able to stay on the field consistently. Last year it was because of, there were some injuries he was dealing with, right? He also wasn't with the team in the spring. because of things going on with him. He had some injuries he dealt with in 23. So, A, he's got to stay healthy. But this is his chance to really step into the lineup and say, hey, I am that guy. I am that guy that can, I did my job. Want to know why I didn't flash maybe as much as people would have liked the last couple of years? Because that wasn't my job. That wasn't my role. My role was to come in and do this, and I did that. Cool. All right, great. But now you need him to kind of step up and be that guy. And there's other D tackles, like Jared Rhodes is talking about Armel Mukum, and that would be great to see Armel break out. I don't think they need Armel to break out. If he breaks out, that's awesome. The reason that I'm looking at Gabriel as my breakout player that's the biggest need at D tackle is because he's the guy that, to me, can provide the biggest boost in production. If Armel Mukum breaks out, it basically means he is Riley Mills again. That's phenomenal. It's great. But what Notre Dame hasn't had really in years is that 310 to 15 pound force against the run that can also give you some disruption in the pass game. And Gabriel was not that. He was not overly disruptive this season. Had some flashes against Georgia, but he's got to take his game to another level because I think he's capable of being a really good football player. I don't see a guy that's going to be 10 tackles for loss and 7 sacks. Like, I don't see Jerry Tillery in him. I don't see a guy that's going to necessarily have like elite production in the tackle standpoint like Howard Cross did 2 years ago when he had 66 tackles. But I see a guy that can be an absolute force up the middle because of his size, because of his power, because of his motor when it's running hot, and because of his playmaking potential. I think he has the tools to be very much a difference maker in this defense, especially against the run. And that is the one area on defense where I think this team can and must make the biggest improvement this offseason. I'm not someone that believes that Notre Dame has to go out and hold teams like 80 yards a game on the ground. That doesn't mean it as much to me because the game has changed. Sometimes I'm willing to give you 120 yards rushing because it's not going to let you throw the ball on us. We saw Notre Dame do that at times last season. But it's got to be better than what it was. Look, you can't give up over 200 yards in back-to-back playoff games. And you just can't. You can't allow Northern Illinois to do to you what they did to you. If you think about the last 5 games, held Indiana to 63 yards, great performance. Held Georgia to 62 yards, great performance. But sandwiched around those 2 games was 197 yards allowed rushing against USC, 7.0 per carry, 204 to Penn State, and 214 to Ohio State. When the game was on the line, in the third quarter, your team is down, you need a stop at the beginning of third quarter to get your offense the ball so you can try to climb back in this game. You almost immediately give up a 70-yard run and eventually give up points to them. That kind of stuff has to improve. And if Chris Ash can just kind of maintain every aspect of this defense, just maintain what it's been, but get better at stopping the run, I think this makes this team a lot better. And Gabriel is built more for that than Howard or Riley was. Part of the reason I think that Al Golden did what he did is because neither Howard nor Riley Mills are elite run defenders. They're more disruptive pass rusher, get into the gaps kind of guys. Gabriel has the tools to be that kind of defender. And that's why I think his emergence more than anybody else at D tackle is the most needed because he has that skill set that's so unique to work to what just this defense needs. So that's where I'm at.
So to follow up on that, it sounds like you're in a similar boat to where I am with Bryce Young, is you need to see that level of consistency. Would you say that is your floor for Gabe Rubio of, okay, at minimum?
I just even from snap to snap, because it'd be like, what was it? Was it the Georgia game? It was the Georgia game where there's one snap, he just gets, maybe it's Indiana. He just gets driven. It was a playoff game. He gets driven off the ball 6-7 yards. And then 2 plays later, the very next play just whips his guy. And you're just like, how do those 2 plays happen that close together? It can be very frustrating watching Gabriel because his talent, his tools, but there's just something missing with him. There's just this level of consistency that we just don't see from him. So I think if he can just be consistent, then the playmaking takes care of itself. It's like I can't have you go through one series where it's just like you look like you're not moving your feet. You just look disinterested. You're getting knocked all around. And then the next series you look unblockable. Like I can't have that in from game to game, because as a play caller, I don't know how I'm supposed to call this series with you in the game. Which version of you am I getting? And I think that level of consistency is needed. But I think Gabriel playing consistent football means that he's a difference maker, whether the production matches or not. It could be there's going to be a game this year that if Gabriel Rubio comes out and just dominates at the point of attack, that he has 3 tackles and 1 tackle for loss. But how do we know he dominated? Number one, we watched the film, and number two, Drake Bowen had 14 tackles and 3 tackles for loss because he was just flying through gaps and blowing people up, or Kingston has 10 tackles and 2 tackles for loss, or you know what I mean? Because they're just flying to the ball because they're having to double team and they can't get off the double team of Gabriel because he's just kicking their butt and the linebackers are just flying to the football. That's sometimes how we'll see it as well. But Gabriel has the tools to be that kind of really good football player. But he's never been that guy with any kind of consistency. And again, I don't mean consistency from game to game. I mean, with Gabriel, sometimes it's series to series, and at other times with him, it's literally play to play. You're just like, you watch a series and you're like, 3 plays, he was like, what is that? And then 3 plays, you're like, what was that? That was and that's what's frustrating. But you can't have that as a defense, because as a middle linebacker, I need to know that I can count on you to do your job and do it well. And if I'm a defensive coordinator, I need to know that I can count on you to do your job and do it well. And those are things that we just haven't seen from him that he's capable of. Because I've always believed this, Trevor. If you're capable of having a play where you whoop a guy's butt for 3 or 4 plays, that's something that you should be able to do all the time. It's not, you didn't luck into, that kind of dominance. You have it in you. You just got to be able to bring it out more consistently. That was an issue for Riley Mills for a long time. For years, we talk about Riley Mills in similar fashion, including last season in 2023. Where there were times when Riley Mills was like, dude, that guy's as good as any D tackle in college football right now. And then there's times like, did he play today? Like, where was he? And why was he so easy to block? Gabriel's kind of in that same fashion. Now, they're different players, but he can have that similar, if he can put it all together the way Riley did from like Louisville till the time he got hurt, that is a huge, huge, huge boost for the Notre Dame defense. And so that's why he's at the top of my list for needed breakouts for this defense and impactful breakouts for this defense. Could you imagine if Notre Dame becomes a really good top 15 caliber run defense next year on top of what we already know they can do in the pass game? That'd be fun to watch.
I just don't know. I don't know how teams score legitimately outside, barring the random big play, or just when you face that one offense that just has all the star power to where it's, evens the playing field a little bit. But man, that'd be fun to watch. I know exactly what Gabe Rubio player talked about. It was against Georgia. Tate Ratledge blew him off the ball, drove him 4 yards in the backfield. On the next play, stoned him with one arm, and then tackled Nate Frazier with one arm on the other one. Yeah. I know exactly what play you're talking about.
You're like, how do you see that play in back-to-back? Like, How does that happen?
Yep.
Well, maybe he was ticked off then do that. Find a way to get yourself ticked off all the time.
Every play.
It's like you need to get some Bruce Banner in you. Like, that's my secret, Cap. I'm always angry. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need to actually get mad. I'm always kind of mad. So I'd love to see that from Gabriel Rubio. Who's your number 2, Trev?
My second one, I went with an overall position group, and it is I'm sticking with the safety position, and nothing to do with the Don Schuler. It's who's going to be lining up next to him. Replacing Xavier Watts has been a hot topic this offseason, and it's one that we're going to be focusing on as the spring rolls on into the summer, fall camp. And so for me, somebody in that group has to step up. We've already talked about Jalen Stroman. He's already on campus. We talked a lot about the transfers earlier this week, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. He's obviously one of the leading candidates to step into that role with his experience playing at the Power 5 level. But I wanted to focus a little bit more on some of the other players in that room that have the opportunity in spring who need to elevate their game. And I'm going to start with Luke Talich. Luke Talich is a guy where he's going into his 3rd season in the program, I believe. And he's somebody that, one, provides a lot of range.
Same class as a Don Schuler.
Okay.
They're in the same class. He's part of that 2023 class.
Okay. And he provides a lot of range. He's 6'4". He received, yes, he's a walk-on, and there's a lot of people that are still going to kind of dangle that over his head for a little bit, but he received, at the time, like Power 5 offers. I think he had an offer. He had a scholarship offer from like Oregon State. I think he had one from Utah
and Washington State. Yeah, Washington State wanted him. And he was never brought to Notre Dame with the thought he was going to be a walk-on for more than a year. There was always, because there was even conversations with Maris Leofow and J.D. Bertrand about maybe coming in and being walk-ons for a year because they were a little tight on scholarships. Ended up not manifesting, but like that's basically like Luke Couch was not recruited in the same way you recruit most walk-ons. He was recruited like Jordan Faison was not recruited to be the impact player that he was. Like that was an added bonus. They liked him, right? But no one recruited him thinking, hey, I think he can help us as a freshman and be starting as a sophomore. Luke Couch was brought in that once Xavier's time is over, we expect you to be pushing your way into the rotation and to help us on defense, not just special teams.
And he's going to be the guy at the top of my list that needs to have a really big spring because he's one of those guys that absolutely has to step up in my eyes. Because one, out of the remaining players in that safety room, Don Schuler aside, and we already talked about Jalen Stroman, he brings the most experience because we're also talking about, Bronte Johnson, Kennedy Urlacher, Ben Minnick, Jadon Blair, guys that haven't really seen a whole lot of minutes. I mean, and in cases like, an Ethan Long or Jadon Blair, they've seen no minutes at the college level. So Luke Talich, for me, is a guy that in the spring needs to elevate his game to where we've talked about this. I don't believe Notre Dame is going to stick with the same type of safety rotation they had this past year where, 85% of the time it's going to be both the Don Schuler and Xavier Watts on the field. Every so often you see Rod Hurd trinkle in there, and then Luke Talich comes in garbage time minutes because the task of replacing Xavier Watts is not going to be a one-person job. Just won't be because, I mean, quite honestly, I don't think it can be. Just be right now because his impact was insane in 2024. More of a testament to Xavier Watts than it is the remaining candidates in that room. But Jalen Stroman, like we've talked about before, has some question marks around him. What is it going to look like if he starts playing a 13, 14-game season? What is he going to look like coming off of a shoulder injury? Luke Talich, as far as to my knowledge, is pretty healthy right now. And he's somebody that they are expecting to take a jump. He's somebody that needs to take a jump in the spring to solidify his name in that rotation to where there won't be a drop-off of, all right, Jalen Stroman's got to come out this series. Who's next? Let's go with Luke Talich. It's, it becomes more of the game plan than the necessity. That's how I look at it. Next person in that room for me is Bronte Johnson. He's somebody that all coaches rave about his athleticism. He would be higher on my list if there weren't some questions around like what position is he going to play. There's been some thought about him going to corner, maybe, what would that look like with him at nickel? But I think him as a safety, again, he still provides good size. I think he's 6'2". He's a freak athlete. He's another person that has the opportunity to step up and be, again, push Luke Talich for, hey, I need to be in this rotation. I'm too good to keep off the field for a second season in a row on defense. So you go through and you look at who's left and who's remaining. Kennedy Urlacher's name is in that discussion. He's a little bit more of the, I don't want to call it a project, but we all know what he's capable of doing in run support. For him, it's going to be, can you take that next step in pass coverage? Because let's call a spade here. As talented as this room is, they're not going to rotate 6 guys at safety. So they're going to have to whittle it down to, in my mind, 3, ideally 4, because Don Schuler also can't stay on the field at all times. Now, he will be playing the majority of the snaps on defense, but Kennedy Urlacher is another guy that has a really high ceiling. Dude flies to the football. What is he going to look like from a pass coverage standpoint? Who knows? Because Kennedy Urlacher is also not a kid that came to South Bend to play special teams for 4 years and come in and mop up duty and just lay out whatever team is down by 30 points at the time where he steps onto the field. And then obviously the final person in that rotation is Jadon Blair in that room. He has an insanely high ceiling, arguably the highest of the group. that I just talked about. He's 6'5". Hard to believe that there's a safety in that rotation that's taller than what Luke Talich is, but that's Jadon Blair. Jadon Blair is 6'5". He's really rangy. He is a lot faster than what he looks like just because he has those long strides, really long legs. He's really, really improved in coverage. Like Brian talked about when we talked about him coming in, his evolution in high school was awesome to watch. He went from, a basketball player playing football to like, hey, okay, you're starting to turn into a pretty good football player. And then his senior year, it's like, okay, you're now one of the best defensive players in the country, in my opinion, for what all you bring to the table, what all you do for your team. And so Jadon Blair is going to have to come in and continue to push to get his name in the rotation. That competition really elevates the rest of the room. And when you go through and you look at the youngest person coming in being 6'5", Jadon Blair, that's really going to push the guys in front of you. But his impact isn't only going to be felt by just pushing the older guys. He has the skill set and the talent to make his way into the rotation. Brian and I have talked before that we believe Jadon Blair is going to play on defense in meaningful minutes, not just mop-up duty, not just on punt coverage and kickoff coverage. We think he's going to play. But in order to do so, he now has to hone in his skill set to earn those minutes. Marcus Freeman and that defensive coaching staff for the last couple of years has shown they will play young guys, not just out of necessity, but if you earn the time on the field, and Jadon Blair has that opportunity in front of him. So for me, Brian, that's my second position group on defense.
I mean, there's players there. I mean, even Ben Minnick, who I had my lowest ranked player in the class, defensive class, when he came out, was still a guy who was a really good football player. He just staying healthy is going to be a big key for Ben Minnick. But yeah, I mean, you're correct, Trev. I mean, there's plenty of talent there, but they're all ifs. If. And would you say that you need two from that room? Did you say you need two from that room to really step up? Mm-hmm. Like you need at least one guy to step on and say, I'm the guy, and then somebody else. And obviously we talked about Jalen Stroman the other day, but this is more focusing on the returners. So even if you assume that Jalen Stroman's going to be a good, like all ACC caliber starter, you still need at least one guy. And honestly, from talking to the coaches last year, they wished that somebody they wanted a fourth guy to step up last year. They're not going to just go to four just because, but they wanted a fourth guy to step up. So if two guys can step up, I do think the staff would like to do that, even if one of them is a guy that's maybe a bit of a hybrid that they kind of cross-train to play some nickel. So that'll be very, very interesting.
Yeah, two would be an ideal number for me, but at the minimum, in addition to Jalen Stroman, one of those guys that I mentioned has to step up in the spring. And there were moments in the national championship game where Rod Hurd, Adon Schuler, and Xavier Watts were all on the field at the same time. Some of that was Ohio State's kind of throwing the ball all over the yard right now. We got to put more DBs on the field. The cornerback room was pretty banged up. That could look a little different this year with the incoming freshman. Cree Thomas is already there. Ideally, they don't go through that devastating injury. Carson Hobbs will probably be ready to hop in the rotation this year as well. So I think it could look a little different, but we have seen in the past, Notre Dame will put three safeties on the field. So for me, an ideal number is two, minimum one. That's how I look at it, Brian. So for your second player or position group on defense, what do you got for us?
I'm going Drake Bowen. And the reason that I'm going Drake Bowen here as a need, not just a guy that I think that's capable of breaking out, but that's a need breakout, is really twofold. And part of it is a consistent theme that I'm going with. What is the biggest area that Notre Dame has to get better on defense next season? Evidenced by the two last games where you fell behind and struggled against Penn State because you couldn't stop their run game. Yes, it's nice you stepped up in the second half, but then they kind of got it going again in the fourth quarter and had some success running the football. Ohio State ran the football effectively on you. Yes, the 70-yarder kind of padded the stats a little bit, but that 70-yarder, it happened in a very important moment. And number two, they weren't exactly like shutting it down until like the year before in 23, they shut Ohio State's run game down outside of the 60-yard touchdown run by Travion Henderson. But they still gave up that 60-yard touchdown run in a close game. And then you allow a 70-yarder against Ohio State this year that sets up another score. So like run defense has to get better, Trevor. It does. It has to get better. And so I'm sticking with the theme. And I think Drake Bowen really stepping up as going from being he was a good football player this year. You know, early in the season, looked like a first-time starter. By the time we got to Louisville, Drake Bowen was a pretty good football player and was a pretty good football player the rest of the year. Had his moments like as a first-year starter that you'd expect him to have, but he's a really good football player. And in the playoffs, again, some up and down moments. But Ohio State, everybody focuses on some of his rougher plays, but there were also some excellent plays in that game. And I expected sort of the up and down from him, from Kingston, from Jaden Alsbury. And I can live with it. You're now going into year 3. I expect your play to take another jump. There's no baseball for him this spring, so he'll be focused. I mean, he practiced in football last year, but he couldn't practice as much and be as focused as much because he had another sport distracting him. I shouldn't say distracting him, because I support players playing 2 sports if they're good enough to do it.
Yeah.
But it is something where you have your time that's being taken by something else. That's not going to be the case this year. So I think him really stepping up and becoming that high volume tackler, thumper against the run is certainly something he's capable of and something they need to do to improve as a defense. But that's only one part of it for Drake. The other part of it for Drake is just improving his all-around game, right? Being a little bit more effective as a blitzer. You know, maybe next year that blitz where he hits, because Drake had 3 of the biggest hits Notre Dame had in the playoffs, and they were all on quarterbacks. You know, on pressure. He was just a second late, right, getting there. And on 2 of those, they completed long throws. Maybe his timing improves just a little bit, and he's a half a foot further downfield, and those hits become the ball flutters. You know, getting a little bit better. He's got to get better. He was actually solid in coverage in zone this year, but he was a guy that could be taken advantage of in some play action and some screen stuff. We know Northern Illinois took advantage of him in that regard. Georgia took advantage of him in that regard. Penn State took advantage of him in that regard. That's where Drake's game has to improve, which I fully expect it to improve. And so I think as good as he was this season as a first-year starter, I think Drake Bowen has a whole nother level he can get to, and I expect him to get to it and become sort of that next great Notre Dame middle linebacker. And they really haven't had a great, like, high-volume, just impact middle linebacker really since Tavon Coney in 2018. J.D. Bertrand was excellent. And he was but part of what made JD so good was he was just a great leader and he was a clutch playmaker. But JD as a middle linebacker was never that high volume, meaning like 100 tackles, 10 plus tackles for loss kind of guy. That doesn't take anything away from how good JD was or how important he was. But I think Drake has a chance to. If any linebacker is going to break out into All-American caliber status this year, I think it will be Drake as a middle linebacker. But he's got to take his game to another level to be there. Now, here's the other piece where Drake's breakout is huge for this team. Jack Kaiser was an exceptional leader for Notre Dame last year. Exceptional leader on and off the field. That void has to be filled by somebody. And Drake makes the most sense from a experience standpoint. He's the middle linebacker. You know, I expect him to have the green check on his helmet this year for the communications. And he's got the most natural leadership skills of anyone coming back that's a veteran. Kingston, to me, has captain traits, but he's a sophomore. And even though I expect Kingston to have a shot to step into the starting lineup this year as the starting will, which we'll get to at some point in time here down the road, I'm not asking Kingston to be a leader this year, just like I didn't ask Drake to be one last year. With Drake, it's like, dude, you do your job. Let Kaiser lead. But now Kaiser's gone. You're a second-year starter. Now it's time for you to lead. And we saw him take charge a lot on the field last year. I mean, I still think of that play against USC where it's 3rd down, and Drake, they did something. I think they just did a backfield check, and all of a sudden Drake is like going crazy, yelling at the defense, getting upset, and then the ball snaps, and he flies right to where the ball's going to be, and they blow it up on 3rd down. You're like, okay, he's figured it out. You know what I mean? Now it's also, now you're the guy that's got to be in charge of making sure Kingston's coming along the way that Jack did with you. Now you're the guy that has to make sure Jalen and Jaden are doing what they need to do as teammates. Not that they aren't, but that's just part of your job. It's your job to bring along Madden Faramo the way that J.D. Bertrand brought you along in 2023 as a true freshman. Drake Bowen has benefited. We talk a lot about how Adon benefited from playing with Xavier Watts, Drake Bowen got to play with two great, all-time great captains linebacker captains for Notre Dame. Now, not all-time greats in like they were the greatest linebackers to ever do it, but they were great captains in J.D. Bertrand and Jack Kaiser. And now it's his turn to step into that role. And so he's going to benefit greatly from them. And I've talked to somebody that's very close to Drake who talked about how impactful JD was to him as a freshman. JD Bertrand did not look at Drake Bowen as like this top 100 recruit that's trying to come take my job. He looked at Drake Bowen saying, this guy's going to take my job someday when I'm gone, and my job is to make sure he's as ready as possible to help this team win when I'm gone, whether I get injured at some point in time or when I graduate, go to the NFL, and it's his turn. And JD took a lot of pride, from what I'm told, by not the coaches or JD Bertrand's dad calling me and because I've never talked to his dad, calling me and telling me, hey, do you know how great? No, this is coming from people around Drake. The way that JD kind of took him under his wing and brought him along, that's called tradition. That's called being a leader. That's called someone who cares about my program beyond just my impact on it. That's what the offensive line has been, what has made it so great. That's what Harry Heastan instilled in those offensive linemen. Is your job isn't to just do your job. Your job is to make sure that the next generation of guys are ready to come along and do the job when you're gone. And the fact that JD had that type of mentality, Jack Kaiser had that type of mentality, should help Drake. But now you're a junior now, bruh. Now it's your turn to be that guy. And so when you've got Madden Faramo and Bodie Cahoon and Anthony Sack and these young guys, your job is to now bring them along, by setting the example from how you work on a daily basis. And then the other is just also being that leader in the room. And he's more than capable of it, to the point where if Drake Bowen's not a captain this year, I'll literally be shocked. Like I might actually be speechless for a whole 30 seconds, which for me is a long time to be speechless. So that's what I expect from him. So for Drake, it's the playmaking in the run game, the production level, the improvements in the pass game, where he's just got to get better at not being so, like, you can't let teams be able to get you the way they got you with those big plays in the pass game. But it's also the leadership. There's two play, and it's crazy. They're both true juniors. You brought up safety. I'm bringing up linebacker. I really don't. You're going to write an article about this, Trevor. But honestly, I've never been less concerned about defensive leadership in my life than I have the last couple of years as Notre Dame has transitioned from losing JD and losing Cam Hart as captains, knowing that you've got Jack Kaiser and Xavier Watts coming along and Riley Mills coming along. And now those guys are gone. And it's like, yeah, I fully expect Drake Bowen and a Don Schuler to step into those voids, and perhaps some other guys that you've brought in through the portal and things like that. But like, I expect that leadership to kind of be there. It says a lot about the culture that Marcus Freeman's building, that just, we don't really think about who the captains are going to be on that side of the ball anymore. But it also speaks volumes about the type of young men they're recruiting into the program. They're not just talented, but they're also the character that they have, the football IQ they have, the leadership traits that they have shown in high school. No one that covered a Don Schuler and Drake Bowen's high school careers is going to be at all shocked that these kids both might be junior captains at Notre Dame. No one. But that's what's now expected of you. And so that's why Drake is my number 2 guy on defense.
I like that you went with Drake. And I'm going to kind of allude back to a question that you asked me when I brought up Bryce Young. And I think it's going to be interesting for some people to try to measure what that looks like for Drake, because he was so productive in 2024. So for you, because we're going to be at the practices, we're going to see it, we're going to see the reports, we have the contacts with inside of the program. So for you, what is it going to look like to know that Drake is trending in that direction?
For me, most of what I want to see this spring is just hearing that the leadership is taking control. That's really the big thing for me. And then the other part is just the consistency of assignment, of just knowing what to do, knowing where to be at all times, and just getting there a step faster than he did last year. Whenever Drake Bowen was a step late, it was never about his athleticism. That's one of the things that I've heard people mention that I think is one of the most head-scratching critiques that I've heard of a player. Like, there's a lot of things you can say about Drake Bowen, a lot of players, but when I hear people tell me that he doesn't run well enough, I'm like, yeah, we're watching a different kid. There's a difference between not being where you need to be because you're not quite certain that you're supposed to be there and you don't have the athleticism to get there. Drake Bowen's got plenty of athleticism to make plays, and we saw it. I mean, he was such an impactful playmaker. But like all sophomores, I mean, Adon Schuler's this way. Adon was an excellent player last year, but Adon made a lot more mistakes than Xavier did. Well, yeah, Xavier's a fifth-year senior and Adon's a true sophomore. You expect that. But you don't just assume – I mean, yes, you assume that it's going to get better, but you still need to see it.
Yeah.
And that's where I am with like Adon. That's where I am with Christian Gray. That's where I am with Leonard Moore. That's where I am with Drake Bowen. A lot of these young guys, Jay Nalsbury, is I was okay with a lot of the mistakes you made last year. I expected those mistakes to happen. But now you're a junior, and we need to see those things become decreased. Now, the one of the good things that I heard from talking to a couple people that know people around Ohio State or cover Ohio State, and I've heard this from 4 or 5 different people, is the one thing that people will praise Chris Ash for is he has a belief that and he talked about it yesterday to a degree, but he's one of those coaches that believes that it's not so much how much we have in, but it's that the players know everything they need to do and that they can play as fast as possible. Let the talent take over. And I think with the talent Notre Dame has coming back at linebacker next year, they don't need to reinvent the wheel with all these crazy schemes and stunts. Not that that's what they did. I'm just speaking in general. You don't need to do all that. It's let them run to the ball because they're really athletic. And so I think that should mesh well with who Drake is. And so it's consistency is really the big thing for Drake. Eliminating, because when Drake makes mistakes, because this is the nature of playing middle linebacker, they tend to be big plays. Bad run fits on the run, gash play. You know, you're peeking in the backfield as a running back is running past you, big play. That's what he has to eliminate. And it's that on top of we're just hearing like, yeah, Drake's like, it's a no-brainer, like captaincy. He's doing the leadership thing. So it's just that consistency, which I think is what you talked about Bryce Young, Trevor. It's like that's what we're talking about with young players that are really talented. It's not, hope he gets a little bit faster, a little bit stronger. It's like he needs to do his job at a more efficient, effective level. And that's what it comes down to, because that's when the talent takes over. And that's going to be true for Jaden Alsbury. That's going to be true for Kingston. That's going to be true for Jalen Sneed. But it's also why I'm so excited about this linebacker core, because the talent's all there. But now we need to see that step. And Drake's one of those guys that I think can go from being a good football player in 2024, which is what he was. He was a good football player. He wasn't an elite football player. He was a good football player. If your middle linebacker's not good, at the minimum good, you're not going to have the defense Notre Dame had last year, and you're not going to go 14-2 in that system and go to the national championship game, because we already seen from Al Golden's first 2 years how important middle linebacker was in his defense. You don't do what they did last year if Drake Bowen's not a good football player. But now Drake needs to go from being a good football player to a difference maker. A guy that we talk, who'd be the linebacker that could maybe contend for All-American honors? That's the guy that's got to be that guy. And then when we get into the fall, we can talk more about numbers and stuff like that. But for the spring, it's just about consistency, and that I want him leading the defense. I want him to be that one guy that everybody more so than anybody else looks to be that Manti in 2012, the emotional leader, the Alohi Gilman in 2018, who was the emotional leader. That's what I want him to be, not just making sure everybody's getting lined up, but that as well. And that's asking a lot of a true junior. But I think Drake's got the shoulders to be able to handle it. But you got to be careful as a coach that you don't ask so much of him in that regard that it then creates maybe some mistakes for him or issues when it comes to doing his job the right way. It's more important that he gets his job down first this spring And then the real big leader captain stuff can come in the fall. But the foundation of leadership that you establish now is what will lead to you becoming a captain in the fall. And that's what I want to see from Drake this spring. So let me ask you this, Trev. I know we're going to go to offense next, but I am curious. Who are some guys that you considered for this that maybe you didn't pick, that you're like, man, I wish Brian would have let me pick 3 or let me pick 4? Was there anybody else that you looked at and said, hey, that was a guy that I had a tough time not going to?
In a way, to be honest with you, 2 of them that I would have chosen were players that you mentioned. Gabe Rubio along the defensive line, Drake Bowen in the linebacking core. The other people for me that I considered needed to step up in more of a rotational role, just based on what we saw of last year and with it being a longer season. But I mean, all the players that we had mentioned have the opportunity or are currently starters on that defense outside of the safety position. But for me, the other players that I thought about a Carson Hobbs for a little bit, because a lot of people are talking about, Notre Dame has Leonard Moore. They have Christian Gray. That's a solid opportunity to be one of the best defensive backfields in the country. They got Mark Zachary and Dallas Golden and Creed Thomas coming in. I think Carson Hobbs gets forgotten about a little bit. From what I had heard and from the things that I had read, he had a really good postseason of practice where he was starting to come along to where if something were to happen to one of the starting corners as the season started to progress, they started to feel more and more comfortable about Carson Hobbs inserting himself to get more snaps. He's somebody for me that I think in the offseason in the spring needs to build on what he did in the winter being in January, and really carry that into the spring, because depth at corner is also going to be huge. We saw last year, players get hurt. Christian Gray missed a game this past season. Ben Morrison was done after the Stanford game. So you always need to make sure you have all hands on deck. I know we're going to talk about it later, but Jawan Sider talked about how he talks about the 4th guy in the room. He prepares them the same way he does as the number 1 guy in the room, because you never know when you need your number 4 guy to be your number 1 guy. I think Carson Hobbs is somebody that has the opportunity to really make a big impact in the spring. He was somebody else that I thought about Armel Mukum, and then I also thought about Madden Faremo. And those are just people that are, like I said, adding depth. Barring an insane jump or an injury, Madden Framo's probably not going to start for Notre Dame in the fall, just with everything that's in front of him. Not for a lack of talent. And then Armel Mukum, same thing. I think between the 2, he has more of the ability to start than what Madden Faremo did. But Armel Mukum's another guy that needs to bring his development along, because they're going to rotate their defensive tackles. We talked about Jared Dawson. We don't know what kind of snap load he can bring on. Gabe Rubio needs to stay healthy and be a part of the team for a full cycle of a season. Elijah Hughes is an unknown. Armel Mukum's another guy for me that needs to step up in the spring.
I really thought about Armel. Josh Burnham was one that I thought about, but Josh is going to be more of a fall guy for me. I don't know that with what I want to see from Josh is something we'll necessarily see in the spring, unless he has that pass rush jump. He's a guy that I really thought long and hard about. But I felt the reason I didn't go with Josh is because I feel like if Josh Burnham just stays who he is, but is more consistent, that's fine. Like a jump would be nice. I think he's capable of it, but it's not something that I think they need for this defense to take another step. But if he has a breakout that we expect from Bryce Young, then great. It's just somebody needs to have it. I think Bryce is his skill set's geared more towards the pass rushing side of it. That was kind of where I thought about Kingston, but Kingston breaking out or Jaden Ausberry breaking out isn't necessarily a need, and it's not something I really thought much about, because I know between him, Jalen Sneed, one of those 3 is going to be like, I got the will position down, if not all 3. And there's a 4-man. I mean, it's just a level of confidence in that linebacker room that probably should have there. And we talked about we're not going to focus too much on Patojo and Boubacar this spring. This is spring breakouts. Those guys I just want to know that they're healthy this spring. I don't need to see anything. I don't know that we will see anything from them based on their injuries this spring. These are more spring breakouts and guys that we need to see kind of take that jump now or start to take that jump now. So those were my options. I thought about like a Donovan Heinisch and But like, I just need you to keep doing what you're doing, man. And I don't know that there's another level for him to get to because of some of his limitations, but I don't need him. I just need you to keep doing what you're doing. That's going to be the big key. So, Christian Gray is a guy that I thought about looking at, but he's going to be more of a guy that I'm going to probably focus on more in the fall as well. So that's kind of where I'm at with that one. So that's defense, Trev. We're going to move on to the offense next, folks, but do us a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, subscribe to this podcast. Subscribing to this podcast is great, but obviously the notification allows you to know when we're going to go live with the show. Also, if you're listening via podcast platform, we would greatly appreciate if you guys could go on to whatever platform you use and give us a 5-star review. It definitely helps us out. It's something you can do that's free. It's something that you can do that only takes a couple minutes. Just go to wherever you subscribe to our channel. It says, rate this or review, and you leave us a 5-star review, and then just tell people what you like about our show. We really appreciate it. We would really appreciate it, and it certainly helps spread the word about Irish Breakdowns. If you can do that for us, we would greatly appreciate it. So, Trevor, I want to talk about the Notre Dame offense. And this is going to be an interesting conversation because this side of the ball, this is always going to be more interesting than the defense because this side of the ball is the side where we're talking about there's a rising needed from where they were. Defense is like, look, if you just maintain, you can be back in the title game next year, right? Because you were the reason they were in the title game last year, right? Just maintain your level of excellence over the last 2 years, and the program's going to be pretty good. The offensive side of the ball is still the one that needs to take that jump. Now, the defense had some moments last year, but you're always going to have that. I don't care how good, there's a game as good as the 2019 LSU offense was, and it was one of the greatest I've ever seen. Probably that and 08 Oklahoma are the two best I saw in the regular season. But that 08 Oklahoma team got shut down by Florida in the national title game. This team went out against Clemson in 19 and put 40 on Clemson in the national championship game, and put up 60 on Oklahoma in the semifinals. So like that, but even that year, they scored 23 points in a win over Auburn. Everybody has an off day. Defense is there. It's about stay there. And if you can improve in certain areas, that's awesome. But just as long as you do is maintain, if the offense maintains what it was last year, it's pretty good, but you're not winning a championship with it. And as we saw that this past season, and we've seen it in a lot of years. And so that's a big thing for me, Trevor, is I need to see this offense take a jump. And so what are the things that we need to see from this offense to take a jump? That's going to be a lot of our offseason discussion. That's going to be a lot of our focus when we're going through and breaking down spring and watching spring and things along those lines. And part of the jump is players taking their level to another, their game to another level. Whether it's like what we talked about before, guys who never played becoming key role players, whether it's role players becoming starters becoming impact players, or impact players becoming like stars of the game. So those are all things that we look at, and there's different types of levels, and they're all needed and they're all important. So what we're going to talk about today is which player on offense who doesn't play quarterback needs to have the biggest jump, whose breakout would have the biggest impact on the team. That's what the focus is going to be on for this segment, is that right there, because that, to me, Trevor, the offense can't just get better from where it was just because you have a new quarterback or just because you have experience coming back on the offensive line. The experience has to result in improved play. Having a better thrower quarterback doesn't automatically mean you're going to be better on offense, because you've got a lot of production you've got to replace in other areas. It means guys got to step up and raise their level of play. That has to happen. So who are those guys? We both had two that were different from each other. I think they're all important. I'm going to let you start off and explain who's the first player, the non-quarterback, that you think whose breakout would have the biggest impact on Notre Dame's success in 2024 as we look to the spring. Because obviously we're not going to talk like Malachi Fields. We're not going to talk about James Flanagan. We're not talking about Will Black, because those guys won't be here in the spring. We're talking about breakouts of guys who, for this spring, like we're going to start to see it now. This spring, we're going to see those breakouts. Who is guy number one for you on offense? I think people know where you're going to go with this one, Trevor.
I was about to say, for anybody who's been listening to this show since the start of the offseason, despite what some people might think, I talk about tight ends quite a bit. And that is where we are going to start. Eli Raridan is somebody for me that needs to take that jump in the spring. In this past season, he played 391 offensive snaps, and he finished the year with 11 catches. The most catches that he's had in a game is 3. He had 3 against Wake Forest in 2023, and he had 3 against Purdue in this past season. He is somebody for me that needs to take that next step for a multitude of different reasons. One, Mike Denbrock has shown that he loves to use tight ends in his offense. Go back and look at what I think Josh Wiley did at Cincinnati. He used Mason Taylor quite a bit, but he used them.
And Leonard Taylor. He had those guys as a duo at Cincinnati.
Yeah. Mike Denbrock has shown that he loves to use tight ends vertically. He likes to get them the ball quickly if they have more of an athletic skill set, which Eli Raridan does have, but he also likes to use them vertically in the seam, attacking downfield, and that is something that Eli Raridan has shown that he can do. Unfortunately for him, the early part of his career was hindered by injuries. He tore his ACL twice in 10 months. That's tough to overcome, which is why that's kind of stunted some of his growth a little bit. But we start to see it come on. He has now gone through his first fully healthy cycle in the Notre Dame football program. It's coming at a good time, him coming into his senior year. But to me, this is needed for a handful of different reasons. One, the tight end position has not been that productive at Notre Dame over the last couple seasons. And when I mean productive, I mean more from an impact standpoint. I'm not expecting any tight end with the skill sets coming back, with the running backs that they have, with the receivers that are coming in. I'm not expecting anybody to be Michael Mayer from 21 and 22. I just don't think that there's going to be enough shares to go around for one tight end to have 67 receptions on the year. Those are the numbers that we're talking about for guys like Jaden Greathouse. And so I think that's going to look a little different. But Notre Dame's tight end room from an impact standpoint hasn't really had that go-to clutch guy. We saw it for moments. In 23, Mitchell Evans had, like 3-4 games in there where it's like, okay, 88's the guy.
It was like a 5-game stretch, and then he got hurt. He didn't do anything the first 5 games of the year, and then he has that great stretch, and then he gets injured.
Eli Raridan has the opportunity to kind of break that cycle because really you could make the argument from 2019 to 2020 when they went from Cole Kmet to Michael Mayer, there hasn't been a smooth transition for the tight end room. A lot of that has had to do with injuries. I would have loved to see what Mitchell Evans would have done if he didn't get hurt in November of 23 and what that could have potentially looked like for this offense in 24. But the issues are the issues. Sticking along the injury line here, Cooper Flanagan's now injured. He was your best blocking tight end last season. He's injured with an undisclosed timeline of when he's going to return. So what does that leave you with? Ty Washington, a transfer from Arkansas, who has shown his ability, but similar to Mitch Evans, he's shown it in spurts. 23 against Ole Miss, had a couple
and
decent
not
games.
Even like a game here, a game there, not even like a stretch of 5 games like Mitchell did.
You have Jack Larson, who a lot of people say has the best hands on the team, arguably the best hands on the team, probably the best hands in the tight end.
Yeah, they're pretty freaking good. They're pretty good.
Yeah. But then you go through,
we'll have questions about can he separate, can he get open, things like that. But if the ball is in the wheelhouse, Jack Kaiser's bringing it, or Jack Larson's bringing it in. There's no doubt about that.
Which are the things that you love to hear. But looking at it moving forward, I can't sit here and predict that Jack Larson is going to break out and dethrone an Eli Raridan from being the probable starter. James Flanagan isn't on campus yet. He's not an early enrollee. His name is escaping me.
He's
the walk
playing
on
hockey
Garrity
right now, I think. Right? Yeah. Henry Garrity. Yeah, his
Henry Garrity.
Yeah. So is a quality walk on. Like I think Henry Garrity can help you. Kevin Bauman, you mentioned Kevin Bauman. Obviously, he's another injured guy that they're going to expect. But yeah, I like the entire depth chart breaking, like having a spring breakout is so important, Trevor. But I like the point that you're making is like all those things are important, but somebody's got to be the dude or this position becomes, because like Mike Denbrock likes him to the tight end, but you know what? Mike Denbrock's not going to force the tight end into the offensive repertoire, which we saw in 2015. You know, when Durham got hurt, second game of the year, Alizé made some big plays, and he would go to Alizé in big moments. Remember that big corner route he threw to Alizé in the fourth quarter against Temple when they're trying to come back. We remember Will Fuller making the game-winning touchdown drive, but it was Alizé's corner route that got that drive going. But he had 13 catches that season, right? I mean, he's not going to force the tight end into the pass game if that guy doesn't emerge. That guy needs to be the guy, and you need somebody to step up. And there's no doubt for me. I think you're spot on that Eli has the best tool set. But, man, I honestly think Eli, if he can figure it out, is a more dangerous player than Mitchell Evans was. And that's not like sour grapes now that Mitchell's gone. He's just a different type of weapon that I think could be really, really dynamic if he can stay healthy, which, I mean – I'm going to ask you a question, Trevor, but one thing we can both agree on, first of all, what's the biggest thing you want to see from Eli Rarid in the spring? Health. Stay healthy. Beyond that, what is it from him specifically that you really need to see this spring for you to go into the fall thinking, oh yeah, a breakout's coming. Wait, hey, college football, get ready because number 9's coming at you. What is it that you need to see from him this spring, Trev?
I need to see him being a reliable part of the offense. That's the big thing for me, especially with there's a lot of talk around Malachi Fields coming in. Well, he's not going to be here until after the spring. So spring specifically, that opens the door, yes, for a Micah Gilbert in the boundary. I believe that also opens the door for Eli Raridon to step up and be to whichever quarterback is going to start that's going through the competition, whether it's Minchie, Angeli, Carr, whenever they step in, they know that number 9 in the offense is kind of their old reliable. That's what the tight end position at Notre Dame had been for so long. In 22, it was kind of their only passing threat, let's be honest. But even in 2021, they still had Kevin Austin, but Michael Mayer still had a really good year. Really good year. But I think of guys like Cole Kmet in 2019. Chase Claypool was the dude in that offense from a receiving standpoint, but Cole Kmet was always that guy who sparked the offense against Georgia. Cole Kmet did. Now, questions around the game plan and why some of it was the way that it was. You only target Lawrence Keys once downfield. We can have a whole separate show on what happened in 2019 Georgia.
Sure.
But to me,
there was no doubt that early in that game, they were like, hey, they can't cover Cole Kmet. Let's build around him. Yeah.
And that's what I need to see from Eli Raridon this spring. Kind of showed a little of it this past spring game. You know, he caught that seam route against Angeli. He was bobbled a little bit. He made the catch, ran it in for a touchdown. But I need to see that part of him evolve. And when I mean reliable, I don't mean a check down. I don't mean, he ran like a little flat route, so we're just going to dump it off to him because Greathouse wasn't open on this one. Need to see him being more of an effective part of the offense. I also wouldn't hate to see him do a little bit more after the catch because I think that's a little bit of what his skill set can provide as well. Get a couple little tunnel screens to him, little quick flare screens out to him. You know, I'd like to see that.
Too. I think he can be a big play guy. You and I were looking at this yesterday. Mitchell Evans was targeted beyond 20 yards down the field twice last season. That's it. I'll be shocked if that's not a bigger number. If Eli Raridon breaks out, I fully expect that number to be greater. And I do think we'll start to see it in the spring, to your point. Yeah.
Yep, I do too. But that's what that looks like for me, Brian.
Yeah. I'd like to see him get back to blocking like he did as a freshman as well. That's a big one for me because he was a really good blocker as a freshman. I'm gonna start off, Trev. I'm gonna start off up front. And I was kind of all around on this one. You know, I thought about Emil Wagner, and so I don't think they need Emil to be better than it was last year. Just needs to be I don't need a breakout from Emil. I just need Emil to make normal year 1 to year 2 growth. If he breaks out and becomes a star, great, but I don't need it. I thought about Anthony Knapp because the reality is barring injury, I believe that Joe Rudolph is dead set on having Anthony Knapp at left tackle. And I thought about having him as a breakout, but I don't know where he's at health-wise. So I don't know how much. I need to know more about, is he going to be 100%, because he had that knee injury against Penn State. So he'll be a guy that we'll talk more about in the fall or in the spring if we do find out he's good to go. But I don't want to waste a lot of time talking about a spring breakout from Anthony Knapp, and then we find out from Marcus Freeman he's never going to be more than 50%, in drills and stuff like that. But even if he was healthy, I'm still going to settle in on my next pick. And that is Billy Schrauth. And I saw Athlon Sports yesterday had their preseason way too early All-America team for 2025. That's great. It's good that you're doing that. But when I looked at that, I said that's more of a reputation pick than it is he played like a preseason second team All-American. I thought early in the season before his knee injury against Purdue, I thought Billy was steady. He was good his first 3 games. You could tell when he came back that he was still working himself back into the speed of the game. And like the Navy game was his first game back. He was solid, but he wasn't great. I thought he was pretty good against Florida State, but again, I think that was more about going against not very good competition than it was Billy necessarily dominating. Sure. And I just felt like with Billy, there just was a lot of like, he was good, but he wasn't as dominant as I think he's capable of being, especially in the run game. And he wasn't as good as he was early in the season, especially in the run game. And that's something that I need to see more of from him this season. And I think he's capable of it. We saw flashes of it last year. He was another guy that I thought really struggled in certain times of a game. And then you'd see him come out and make a block where you're like, whoa. And I think it was the Jordan Penn State game where I thought he really struggled in the first half. And then that first drive of the second half, he was driving people off the ball. And he had a great second level block on Aeneas Williams' long run that set up their touchdown in the third quarter. He's got the tools to be an All-American. There's no doubt about it. I just need to see him become that. And Athlon's sort of projecting that onto him, and I'm okay with it. I'm not saying like, you guys are stupid for having. No, he's capable of that, but I need to see him take that jump, and I think it needs to happen this spring. And obviously being healthy is going to help. Hopefully they've settled in on a position for him, whether it's right guard or left guard. I don't because like we keep talking about it. I'm going to have an article coming out here over the next week that I'm going to say, like, obviously Notre Dame's got to figure out what they're going to do with left tackle and right guard. Well, my prediction is that they're going to move Charles Jagasaw to guard and start Anthony Knapp at tackle as long as he's healthy. That's what I think they're going to do. But I think maybe we're incorrectly assuming that that's going to be Jagasaw moving to right guard. Just because remember, Billy Schrauth started the season off at right guard and then moved to left when it was clear that Sam Pendleton wasn't, handling the job the way that you needed him to. Could it be that they want to get Anthony and Charles side by side? So what Anthony lacks in maybe girth, you're making up for by putting a 6'7", 330-pound monster next to him. You know what I mean? And here's a thought. We talked about some of the issues that I have with Anthony Knapp in the run game, pass game, but I keep saying the dude's a dominant as a 290-pound freshman was a butt kicker in the run game. Could you imagine him and Charles Jagasaw playing side by side? We keep talking about them in the competition, but what if Joe Rudolph decides, I want those two guys side by side? Like, what's the left side of the line going to be like running the football to the left next year if Knapp and Jagasaw are side by side? Whether one's at guard, even if you flip and put Jagasaw at tackle, and
I was just about to say
it doesn't matter. But those two side by side, that's possible. So they need to figure out what they view as the ideal line and give that a look right away. Whether that's Billy at right guard, Billy at left guard. Michael Parks in the chat said Billy at center, which he played in one of the All-Star games. Maybe that's it. But here's the reality. Figure out where you want to play Billy Schrauth. Right guard, left guard, don't care. Put him there and let him go. And then it's up to Billy to put in the work needed to take his game to another level. Because I do think Billy Schrauth is capable of being an All-American guard. He was a top 100 recruit coming out of high school for me. Borderline top 50. He was a dude. He's been good at Notre Dame. Injuries have kept him in some other things, like the coach making a bad decision in 2023 on who to play, has kept him from really taking his game to that next level. There's his own choices, and as a young guy, and he came into Notre Dame with an injury that cost him the spring. There's been a lot of stuff, but he's going into this offseason healthy and talented and now experienced. He's now got, what did he miss? 4 games last year? So he started 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. He started 12 games last year. He started 3 the year before. He now has 15 starts under his belt. It's time for Billy Shrout to take that next step and become the difference maker that he's capable of being. Because I still believe this, Trev. Tackle's important position at Notre Dame. Very important. But you're a inside zone duo counter offense. Those are your 3 bread and butter plays. Inside zone, counter, duo, kind of in that order. If you're going to be dominant running the ball with those plays, you need to dominate from guard to guard. Yes, tackle's important, but you've got to dominate from guard to guard. And I think that is such an important piece. And if you can have someone step up, like we had a submission yesterday in the Buy So Hold, comparing next year's offensive line to the 2017 offensive line. And I'm like, let's pump the brakes a little bit on that, because that line had a Quentin Nelson and this line has no Quentin Nelson. It will not have a Quentin Nelson. But what they need, however, is that 2017 offensive line saw the best version of Mike McGlinchey, the best version of Quentin Nelson, and the best version of Alex Bars. Like, they all played to their potential that season. And I would argue that so did Sam Mustipher. That was his best season. You need Billy Shrout as one of your 2 veterans to be that guy for this offense. He needs to be that monster at guard that you say, okay, now we're cooking. Now on 3rd and 2, we're running behind his side, whether it's to him with duo or away from him with inside zone, because we're going to cut that sucker back behind him. They need Billy Shrout to be that guy. He could have the biggest impact his breakout along the offensive line could have the biggest impact. Because there's certainly a level of dominance I'm expecting from Charles Jagasaw wherever he plays. I expect Emil to kind of just make steady growth. Billy needs a true breakout, because he can go from good player, flashy, good to boom, that guy's an All-American. And I think they need that at guard, big time at guard.
I agree. I agree completely. His next evolution is going to be, it has to take that step. The most dominant offensive lineman that we talk about that Notre Dame has on is most consistently that we talk about is Charles Jagasaw, a guy that started 2 games. We're talking about a guy in Billy Shrout that started 15. It's time for him to take that next step. I agree completely. I agree. My final one, Brian, is also along the offensive line. And I'm going to keep this one pretty brief, just because it's going from it falls in between categories, I guess, if that makes sense. Because we talked about players who hadn't played but then need to step up into more of a role, or you're going from a starter who needs to take that next step to being more of an impact player. Mine falls somewhere in between those 2, and I'm going with center on the offensive line, just the position group as a whole. Because as of right now, that to me is one of the bigger question marks along the offensive line. There's a lot of questions around, where's Jagasaw going to play? Where's Knapp going to play? Is Gerby Lambert going to come and step in and battle Emil? Is Sullivan Absher going to get a chance at right guard? Well, Ashton Craig is coming off of a knee injury from this past season. And behind him is Joe Otting, who is yet to take significantly meaningful snaps at Notre Dame. And to me, the center position is pretty important. And it's a position that Notre Dame hasn't really, I don't want to say figured out, but it's had a lot of this over the last couple of seasons. Zeke Correll was a quality football player, but they made the call to go with Ashton Craig, I believe, after Zeke got a concussion in the Clemson game, because I think that was Ashton Craig's first time stepping in, playing meaningful snaps.
Meaningful snaps, correct. Yeah.
And then from then on, it's like, okay, the play started to improve on the interior, combined with Billy Schrouth stepping into the starting lineup around the same time, and then they kind of took off and started going with it. I think there's a reason why they rushed for what they did at the end of the 2023 season and started handling opponents pretty well.
250 yards a game. Him and Schrouth both got inserted into the lineup the same exact week because Rocco also got hurt against Clemson.
That's right. So for me, I look at the center position of more of you need to break out, as in you need to have some sort of solidified process for who you're going to figure out who your center is going to be. Ashton Craig's a question mark. I don't know what the health for him looks like. Is Joe Otton going to step up to really push Ashton Craig if he is next in line? Could it be somebody that we don't even imagine it being? Could it be an Anthony Knapp? Do they move him to the interior and try him out at center? Could it be, Michael Parks brought it up in the chat, could it be a Billy Schrouth? Who knows? Because full transparency, if you were going to ask me who the starting left tackle was going to be the second week going into fall camp after Jagasaw went down, I would not have put my money on Anthony Knapp. I wouldn't have, but he did. And then he ended up starting 15 games. And so who could it be that third, I don't want to say unknown, but it could be that third wild card guy.
Could it be somebody else moving, like a Billy Schrouth? Yeah, right. Like, let's say they get to the point where, like, dude, Sullivan Absher's got to play, Anthony Knapp's got to play, Jagasaw's got to play, Wagner's got to play, and Schrouth's got to play. Okay, those are clearly our 5 best linemen. Okay, who's playing center? You know what I mean? Like, well, Billy's played center before. I mean, not in a game, but he's taken snaps before. You know, he's done it in high school and at the to your point, maybe it's somebody else. Maybe it's something like that. That's fair. It's fair.
So for me, what does that breakout look like in the spring? One, it's going to be surrounding Ashton Craig's health. He is also coming up on the 6-month window of coming back from an ACL tear. So I don't expect him to take any live reps in the spring because he, along with Jordan Botelho, both got injured against Purdue. So what does that look like? Does Joe Otting step in? Does Joe Otting step in and take the first team reps? Do they just come right out of spring and they're like, hey, look, Knapp and Schrouth, you guys are just going to kind of alternate for the first week of spring at center with Joe Otting? What does that look like? And so for me, that's why I have it in as my breakout, because unlike the other positions along the offensive line there's multiple people who can play this position, like left tackle. Knapp can, Jagasaw can. Now it's just who's the better of. At center, it's like, well, Craig can, but he can't really play in the spring. Joe Otting, we haven't seen take a meaningful snap, and I'm sure that there's a third person in that rotation that could be considered, but I don't know who that is. So for me, that's why I have center as my second one.
My second one is not one player, it's a group of players, and you need one of them step up. And one of mine is the speedy receivers. You need somebody that's has some level of game-breaking ability at speed to step up. And there's 3 guys I have in mind, and maybe one's in the slot, maybe one's outside. I don't care. But I believe they have 3 receivers in the roster coming back next year who will participate in the spring that I believe one of them has to break out. Now, the breakout can be different things. It could be somebody who has 20 catches for 450, 500 yards. They're just and 5 times, like, okay, that guy only touches the ball like an average of once or twice a game, but when he touches it, it's a big play. It could be a guy that doesn't play a lot that goes to being a difference maker. It could be Will Fuller went from catching 6 passes as a freshman to 70 for over 1,000. He had as a sophomore. He had over twice as many touchdowns as a sophomore than he had catches as a freshman. Golden Tate went from 6 catches as a freshman to over 58 for over, I think it was like 58 for 1,080 and over 10 touchdowns as a sophomore. Equinemius St. Brown had 1 catch for 8 yards as a freshman, and the next year went and had over 50 for over 900 yards. I mean, that has happened before. It would not surprise me to see something like that happen with the talent, but it doesn't have to only be that. But what I'm more focusing on is there's an element that these players have that they need in their offense, and they need one of these guys to force Mike Denbrock to say, we have to get that guy in the lineup. We have to get him the football. The three players I have in mind are KK Smith, Cam Williams, and Logan Saldate. Those are the three guys that I have in mind. KK we've seen before. We know he can run. He can fly. We saw that last year in the spring. But he's got to get stronger. He's got to prove he can stay healthy. KK is an interesting player because KK in high school, and I never thought I'd call him KK, but it's just like his name's KK on the roster now. I'm kind of past the whole, I'm not going to call his name's Caleb, but I was like, I'm not calling him KK. But that's his name on the roster now, so I'm going to respect that. But, we saw in high school, Trev. I mean, he was a dynamic return guy. He was a guy that could take a screen and make people miss and fly to the ball. He's got downfield speed. I mean, I've talked to different sources around the program, and you start asking them who's the fastest guy on the team. His name almost always comes up as in the conversation for fastest guy on the team. But he just hasn't been able to put it together yet. And there's really been two big things holding him back and that I can see. Number one, just can't stay healthy. He had another shoulder injury last year that cost him the second half of the season. They couldn't play him the second half of the season. And then the other thing is his functional strength is not good enough yet. Now, part of that's because he had a shoulder injury coming into college. He had a shoulder injury last year. That's a big concern that I have. That's a big medical red flag for me. But if KK is healthy this spring, and that's an if, I need to see him get stronger. And why does that matter? Well, number one, if you're a really fast guy, but you don't have good functional strength, you're going to get rerouted like crazy. You're going to get jammed like crazy. And you're not going to be. The only time you're going to catch the ball is when you're just wide open. When you're open, because and this has been an issue for KK. We saw it in the game this past year. We saw it in the spring game last year. He'd go up for a ball, doesn't really have any strength to kind of get that guy off of him, and the DB just drives him and rides him past the football. He's got to get better with his functional strength. He's never going to be mistaken for Michael Floyd. From a strength standpoint, doesn't have to be that because his speed is such that he can be that. I mean, look, if KK figures it out, he only needs to touch the ball 15 times next year to make a big impact. Because I could see KK being a guy that catches 15 to 20 passes and averages over 20 yards a catch. And like a quarter of his touches are touchdowns. I could see that. And you'd have to worry about that when he's in the game. Because he could be a guy. Remember in 2019 when Braden Lindsey kind of had that late season breakout? He had the reverse for a touchdown against USC, the jet sweep for a touchdown against BC. They were throwing him the ball deep. And it got to the point where, and Chris Tyree was like this also, and I'm trying to think what year it was. Or actually, it was a little bit last year. There were certain teams that just were petrified of Chris Tyree. And he'd go in, it was South Carolina in 2022. He'd go in motion, or he'd be in the game, and they would just panic and just overreact to the direction that Chris Tyree went, which opened up some big play opportunities in the pass game, including a bomb to Braden Lindsey for a touchdown. But they would just Braden Lindsey touched the ball once and he could go for 50-yard touchdown. KK can have that type of ability where he gets one jet sweep and one block is made on the perimeter. He makes one guy miss and boom, it's a 69-yard touchdown like Braden had against BC. They run a reverse where they fake a toss and he runs backwards and he goes around and he just outruns the defense for a 50-yard touchdown like Braden Lindsey did against USC in 2019. Or he just – what was Braden's stat line against what was his stat line to I think it was Navy. I think he caught like 2 passes for like 90 yards or something like that. Let me look up what his stat line was that game. But like the point being, Braden in 19 didn't need a lot of touches to be an impact player. He was just kind of 2 catches for 87 yards and a touchdown. In the last 4 games of the year, Braden Lindsey caught 5 passes. That's it. 5 passes in the last 5 games of the year. But those 5 passes went for, let's see here, 142 yards and a touchdown. He also, in that stretch, had 9 carries. So nine like where he, they reverses or jet sweeps. He had 9 carries for 131 yards. So what did I say? 131 yards rushing. Do you remember what I said the receiving yards were, Trev? So
140.
So he had 135, would be 142. So 87 plus 48. plus 7, 142. So in the last 5 games of that season, Braden Lindsey had 273 yards, and he had 2 touchdowns. That's it. But he only touched the ball 14 times during that stretch. Excuse me, last 4 games of the season. He touched the ball only 5 catches, and he had, 9 carries, so 14 times, 273 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then you obviously remember the play he had, the 51-yard run he had against USC that year. The point being, Braden Lindsey didn't need to touch the ball a whole lot to make big plays. In 2019, Braden Lindsey had 13 carries for 200 yards and 11 catches for 254 yards and 2 touchdowns. Why can't KK Smith do that? Why can't Cam Williams do that? Right? Like, figure it out. And that was my frustration with the offense in 2019 is, why did you wait till the last 4 games of the season to do that with Braden Lindsey when we all saw he was capable of that against New Mexico? Yes, it's New Mexico, but you saw it. You saw him outrun the defense for a big play from Dracovic. Brendan Clark throws him a now screen. He makes 3 guys miss and then outruns the defense for a touchdown. He doesn't need to be a full. Well, he doesn't know this. He doesn't know that. I don't care. He only needs to know how to take a jet, how to take a reverse, how to take a now screen, and how to run a go route and how to run an over route. That's literally all he needs to do. That's all he needs to know. And you can figure out a way to get him in the game. Why can't KK do that? Why can't Cam Williams do that? Why can't Logan Saldate do that next year? The point is, they can coach him up, get him ready to go. KK, I mentioned a lot about. Cam Williams might be your most physically talented receiver on your roster. And I get he's way behind. And I understand why in 2024 you didn't feel the need to force the issue with him because you were a run-heavy team. It was more important to get blockers on there, to get your possession receivers in the game. Notre Dame didn't really care about having a stretch-the-field weapon last year. Just wasn't something that they were concerned about. They didn't have a quarterback that was going to really do that. They were comfortable with the way things went. Fine with that. Okay. You're going to have a different type of quarterback in 2025, which means you're going to need to have sort of more of that big play presence, which means you're going to need to find a way to get Cam Williams the football or KK Smith the football. And I don't care that he doesn't know the whole offense. I don't care. Look, there's no reason that a kid like him can't be taught 5 routes really well. A hitch, a go, a post. I know he can run a post because I watched him run a post for a touchdown. He beat Chance Tucker for a touchdown in the Jersey scrimmage last year, by the way. A crossing route and an over route on top of a now screen, which is literally the one thing he knows how to do because he did it in high school a bunch. That's it. That's only 5 routes he really needs to know. Now, of course, it'd be nice to teach him how to run hitches and stops and digs and all that. For him to become a full-time guy, he needs to learn all those things, and that's fine. But you can't tell me you can't find a role for a kid like him in your offense next season. But there's also the element of Cam needs to also take on some accountability for that also and put in the work to master his craft, to force them to play him. That's what you want to see. As a coach, that's what you want to see. Make me play you. Give me a reason to play you. I want to. And I can say this, having talked to a couple sources inside the program, there's nobody at Notre Dame that I've talked to that doubts whether or not Cam has the talent to be what we all thought he could be. The question is, does he know how to play the game? And Cam's got to take on that ownership this offseason and say, hey, I'm going to put in the work to master my craft to where they have no choice but to play me next year. You need one of those 2 guys to step up and become that guy. And Logan Saldate is a little bit of a dark horse for me. He's a little bit of a different type of player than those 2, but he's another guy that's got some serious speed that I think could really add an element to this offense as a Z or as a F, a flanker, like a slot. One of those 3. And Logan's a guy that, in high school showed he had speed. He's got good hands. He's a good route runner. Like, he's a guy that could, we're not talking a lot about him. We're talking more about Cam and KK and Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison and the transfers. But I'm going to have my eye on 19 in the spring also. I want to see what 19 can do. And I know there's Micah Gilbert, but I'm talking, these are guys with a specific skill set. They need one of those 3 to break out. If 2 break out, Trev.
Yeah.
Dude. This team is going to be really fun to watch. But you need one. You don't need 2. It'd be awesome if 2, but you need one of these 3 guys to say, my performance, my work ethic, my productivity, my accountability, my consistency, my playmaking, all of that, you've got to play me. You've got to play me. And that's a huge need for this offense in 2025. And we need to see that. It's got to start this spring. Got to start this spring.
Were there any other players outside of the ones that you had already talked about, besides Shrouth, besides the receivers, speedy receivers with that skill set, that you considered to add into your list?
Yeah, I thought about Micah Gilbert just because Malachi Fields is not going to be here this spring. It'd be great if Micah has like a big offseason where you're like, hey, you know what? We think Malachi is going to be a dude, but we don't have to play him 60 snaps a game, especially early on. We can maybe give Micah 15, 20 snaps and take some of that burden. So that way Malachi, who's never played more than 12 games in a season because he's played for a team that hasn't been to a postseason game, where his legs are going to be underneath him enough to where he's still beating you in December and January. Or in times like I'm sitting there thinking about this, Trev, like if getting some 12 personnel looks where you've got Eli Raridan and let's say either Ty Washington or Jack Larson, and looking forward to the fall, James Flanagan, hopefully Cooper Flanagan is, if he was healthy, whoever the tight end, Jack Larson, but you're in a 12 personnel look with Malachi and Micah Gilbert on the field together. Number one, I'm going to have a real physical blocking group for my stud running backs. But number 2, I got some size and some serious ball skills on the field too, where if I can get you to come down and try to stop our run, I'm going to be able to take some shots. They can all stretch the field. I mean, if you're in a 4-down alignment with James Flanagan, Eli Raridan, or Ty Washington, and you've got Micah Gilbert and Malachi Fields on together, you got at least 3 guys you can take a shot with, if not 4. And maybe some 22 personnel looks, which could be really interesting. Where you have 1 receiver on the field, and maybe that's a set where Micah can get in there, where you got 2 tight ends, 2 backs. I mean, it's a lot of different things where maybe you could go big and have Malachi and Mike on the field together. If Micah forces you to be that kind of guy, I thought about him. I mentioned earlier, I thought about Emil Wagner. I thought about Knapp. Another guy that I really leaned into is potentially is a guy like Keidron Young. If Keidron Young can kind of have a big spring where he forces himself into the rotation, does he kind of become your 3rd down back? I mean, your 3rd and short back, your 2nd and short back, your 12 personnel back, your goal line back, where he takes on some of that burden that you're losing with Riley Leonard, to where you're not asking Jeremiah Love to be that guy all the time. That would be something that I would love to see as well. But do they need that though? That was where I kind of came down on the one with Keidron, is if Keidron Young has a spring breakout, that's huge for the offense. Because I still think Keidron can be a dude at Notre Dame, like an absolute dude. But if he doesn't break out, they're still going to be really good at running back. Like, they're going to be okay. That's why I didn't go with him. But I thought about it. I definitely thought about it because he's a dude and he could take a lot of that short yardage goal line type of role, or just we've been hitting you with speed for 2.5 quarters. We're up a touchdown or 10 points. We want to put this game away. Hey, Keidron, now it's your turn at 230 pounds with fresh legs to go put this game away. You know what I mean? Like, something like that kind of role I could see him breaking into, but they don't need that. And this debate was more about need. And that's why I kind of went away from they don't need Micah Gilbert to do that. Be great if he did. They don't need Keidron to have that breakout season, in my opinion. I thought about Emil, Knapp, but I really felt like Shrouth and the speed receivers is really the two that carried the day for me. What say you, Trev? Was there anybody else that you kind of were leaning into or thought about for it?
Yeah, I had a couple, and honestly, they're heavy-hitting names. But we talked about the different grading scales that we had, and going from somebody that was like an impact player, but now you kind of have to show that star power. One of the ones that I left out was Jaden Greathouse. And he's been a hot topic of conversation. But here, my rationale for it, Malachi Fields is not going to be here until the summer. So Notre Dame enters yet another spring with an undefined number one go-to target. Because Bo Collins wasn't practicing in the spring this past season either, and I think the issue was forced a little bit. I love Jaden Greathouse, and I love his potential. And obviously, the thing most fresh in my mind was his performance against Penn State and his performance against Ohio State. Not all of this was his fault, and I think you could also argue that the majority of this was not his fault. But he finished 2024 with 7 games with just 1 catch. And that can't happen. Just can't. With a player like Jaden Greathouse, it can't. But he needs to pick up where he left off and go from starter impact player that he was in 24 to being another star in 2025. I don't think that you can have a shortage of star impact players at the receiving core. I just can't. I would much rather be, yes, there's a lot of people that are hanging their hats, not hanging their hats on, but there's a lot of people that are just kind of, hey, Greathouse kind of did his thing against Ohio State, and you have Malachi Fields coming in. Totally. Why can't Jaden Greathouse put it in a spot where Notre Dame has a 1A and 1B at receiver, not a 1 and a 2 at receiver? To your point, then you start seeing the other guys come along, like the speed guys. Jordan Faison comes back after lacrosse season, and he picks up where he left off and is hopefully healthy. But Jaden Greathouse was one that I thought about. But again, him going from a really good impact starter to a star, I don't know if that is absolutely needed for Notre Dame. Because like I said, they made the national championship this past season with him only catching 1 pass in 7 games. Regardless of who the quarterback is, that production is going to increase. I don't see for the majority of the regular season him finishing the day with 1 catch and or 1 target. I just don't. Mm-hmm. Another guy that I thought about was Charles.
Can I before you move on from Jaden Greathouse, can I make a comment on that?
Yeah.
I thought about him for 3 seconds, and here's why I went away from Jaden Greathouse. Because my first thought was him breaking out to be that star player, but here's the thing. I thought he already did that last spring. He was phenomenal last spring. It's like, so if he's phenomenal again this spring, okay, will they do that with him in the fall? Will the quarterback, you know what I mean? That was kind of the reason I kind of went away from it, because like he was a dude last spring, Trev. Like what we saw against Penn State and Ohio State, like you all want to know why we hyped up Jaden Greathouse so much last spring, and it wasn't just us. And this is something that I was told, like all the sites were hyping up Jaden Greathouse, because that's what he was doing every day we were at practice. That's what he did in the Jersey scrimmage. And there were times when he was doing that and they weren't getting him the ball. Like there was 2 or 3 times he was wide open in that where he wasn't getting the ball. He was torching the Notre Dame secondary, which is one of the best in college football. We saw that constantly, but it didn't translate. I don't think that's on him. It's not about him that I went away from it. It's like, I think Jaden Greathouse is a dude. It's whether or not the quarterback's going to throw him the freaking ball. So that's why I was like, if he dominates again this spring, whatevs. It's like he did that last spring. So everything you said is legit and correct. I just kind of felt like, and I'm saying this because you weren't here last spring. You weren't covering the team last spring. So you couldn't have known this. But that's why I didn't pick him, is because of that. Because it's like, well, he already did that last spring.
Totally.
Like we need to see them do that. Like he needs to be more involved in games, no doubt. But I'm not going to believe that they're going to focus on him the way they need to until we get the games and they're doing it.
Sure. No, that's absolutely fair. Absolutely fair. The only other person that I thought about was Charles Jagasaw. And the reason why, his tenacity on the field is fantastic. He had a pretty good national championship game. He was fantastic when he stepped in at right guard against Penn State. But at the end of the day, we're talking about a guy that's had a pretty injury-riddled last couple of seasons, and he has only started 2 games. So for me, his breakout in the spring is staying healthy. Kind of like similar conversation with Eli Raridan. Number one priority is stay healthy. But 2, you need to make it as such where Joe Rudolph, Mike Denbrock isn't just relying on watching a half of a game against Penn State and your performance against Ohio State to be like, all right, this dude's just going to start somewhere. Take your game to that next level, be that level of consistency. Because one of his most dominating blocks against Penn State, he went the wrong way. One of his 5 to 6 dominating blocks in that game. But that is where it comes in to where he hasn't played that much football. Anthony Knapp has more snaps than he does. Ashton Craig has more snaps than he does. Billy Schrouth has more snaps than he does. Emil Wagner has more snaps than he does. So Charles Jagusah was another one of those players for me. I went away from it because his upside is such to where his breakout is, for me, would literally just be consistency. Because I think a lot of those issues that I brought up get solved with just being healthy and staying in the lineup. It was a lot left to be desired when he got injured, unfortunately, at the start of fall camp last season, because if he would have played this past year more so than what he did, he's nowhere sniffing my breakout list because he's already there. In the same light that Jeremiah Love is not sniffing my breakout list for the spring because it's, what do you need to see from 4?
Right. We won't know that he's becoming that next level. Like, what is a breakout for him? It's a Heisman finalist. I mean, that's the only next level that he's going to get to.
Yeah.
But we're not going to see that this spring. You know what I mean? So,
yeah. I'm with you. Well, listen, folks, that's going to do it for the offensive spring breakouts. There's going to be much more conversations around players breaking out in the spring. Spring practice is going to start here most likely sometime within the next couple weeks, definitely less than a month. But to make sure that you guys are in the now, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. And the best way to stay in the loop is check out the Champions Lounge. You can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Those are our premium message boards, all the mailbag questions that have come in, all of the topics that we've been talking about on the shows. Those discussions are happening right now over on the message board. So you can find all that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, we're going to wrap up today with a mailbag. And I've been seeing some questions come in throughout the show.
Some very interesting ones that are not even football related. Very interesting questions today, Trev. Very interesting questions today.
We do. It's the off season, right? It's the time for it. So we have some interesting questions to get to. If this is, for by chance, your first ever mailbag that you've participated in, the best way to get a question in, you label it with an MB or a mailbox emoji. That's how Brian and I know that we star it. We set it off to the side so we know when to address it. And then if you want to get your question answered pretty quickly, you can always throw in a super chat. Those automatically get bumped to the top. We're going to go for about an hour and or until we run out of questions here. So without further ado, Brian, it's mailbag time, man.
Also, people ask, hey, are you going to talk about the assistant coaches? As we said, if you guys want to hear our opinions about certain things, you can go and throw that in. And we our first question actually is about that. But if you want to hear more about what you think about this, what you think about that, go ahead and throw that in there and we'll talk about it in the mailbag.
Aiden Benami getting us started. Coach Sider's press conference 2 minutes in, and you can see he's a perfect fit for Notre Dame. Sounds just like Coach McCullough. What a great hire.
Yeah, I mean, everything we've heard about him is great. I mean, look, if a coach can't sound good in a press conference, you're in trouble, especially guys that are as experienced as he is. But I kind of felt like one of the things I loved about Dylan McCullough was there was a genuineness to him. He was not going to BS you. He was going to tell you what he thought. And he's someone who seemed to really value young people, developing young men. And that's the sense I got from him. I mean, Tony Alford was that way. Dylan McCullough's that way. And I got that vibe from Jawan Sider. Even he's talking about, like, look, in the offseason, he said exactly he said it differently, but what have I always said? Once you get to the offseason, your decision-making process is about what's best for you, not what's best for your teammates. Look, once the season starts, your priority number one is the team. I'm doing my Bo Schembechler thing, right? It's the team. But once the offseason starts, you've got to make what's the decision that's best for you. He talked about that a little bit, and And I thought that was good. And, he talked about the running backs, but he didn't like take such a deep dive where it felt like, okay, they're all locked into those jobs, but it looked like he has a good sense of the players. And it was, I mean, it was exactly what you hoped you heard from him. So I liked what he had to say. I thought it was, I mean, yeah, you're hoping to get a top-notch coach, which I think he did. Talked about his influences, Doc Holliday, who's a very well-known coach. Calvin McGee. I didn't realize Calvin McGee had passed away, but he was Rich Rod's OC when he was in those great West Virginia days, and Jawan Sider played quarterback for them back in the day. So I didn't realize he had passed away, but talked about his influences and things that he's learned, and Dana Holgerson and all this kind of stuff, which I thought was cool to hear. That you always want to know what a guy's background is, but yeah, I mean, everything. We thought it was a great hire coming in, and it was a good first impression in that regard to say, yep, we thought this was going to be a great hire. I think it's going to work out. And he hit the ground running as a recruiter, man, from stuff we've heard. So that part sounds like it's going to go really well. No doubt.
Yeah, I was impressed by his segment of the press conference. For me, I'm big with authenticity, and you can just tell that he's a guy that it makes sense why guys like Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen wanted to come back for another year. I'll say that. On top of wanting to still compete for a national championship, I'm not saying that Sider was the only reason why he came back. Those guys came back, but you can tell, you can see why, and it was a great hire. He talked through his recruiting process and what he likes to do. He talked about it's just as much. It's all about relationship building. He talked about how it's a changing time where we're starting to enter this world of transactions. He brought that up, and he talked about how at the end of the day, when Ohio State and Notre Dame and Penn State and all these teams are kind of offering you the same amount of money, give or take, what's going to be the difference maker? And it's the relationships. And so that's something that's huge, and it makes sense why he's had success as a recruiter. So I love the Jawan Sider hire. Oh my goodness, the Jawan Sider's hire.
Don't say that 10 times fast.
Oh my goodness! But the press conference just helped reassure. It just helped reassure.
It's confirmation. Yeah.
Aiden Benami, thoughts on Ash's remarks? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, and it will look the exact same, etc. Mike Mickens doesn't need my help. I'm here to fit in around everyone else. Sounds humbled.
Yeah, there's a lot of things Chris Ash said in yesterday's press conference that I was happy to hear. There were also some things where I'm like, that's coach speak. You know what I mean? Like, there are some things that he said that I was like, okay, you say this, but you're saying that. You know what I mean? Like, there was some of that where you kind of have to toe that line. I mean, he has to kind of say, if it isn't broke, don't fix it and all that. But he's also not coming here to run Al Golden's defense the same way Al Golden ran his defense. He's got to put his own stamp on it, because if he's trying to be Al Golden, he will fail. But he also can't come in and say, I'm not Al Golden, I got to run my defense. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, he's savvy enough and he's been around the block enough to know what to say. So he didn't strike me as humbled. He struck me as savvy and knowing what to say. But I also think that there's a level to, there's also some truth to it. I don't think he walks into this thinking like this thing was a joke. I got to fix this. I got to fix that. I got to fix this. I don't know that he necessarily comes back to do a rebuild. I think he probably would just stay in the NFL to do a rebuild. So I think there's some truth to it. And that all sounds fine and dandy on day one. But then by the time you get to week 8, you're like, okay, we're not really running our defense anymore. It's going to be his defense. And he talked about changing terminology. He talked about, which is, again, an example of, I'm not just picking up Al Golden's playbook and running Al Golden's playbook. If it's the Notre Dame defense and not your defense, then why are you changing terminology? You know what I mean? But again, he needs to he needs to do what he knows. He needs to do what he's comfortable with. You know what I mean? So this isn't a criticism of him. It's actually kind of that's a savvy guy. It's a guy that's clearly been a head coach. You know what I mean? Like, I loved what he had to say about what being a head coach taught him and how it made him a better coordinator. Like, dude, I know the issues that a side of the ball can give a head coach. So let's make sure we're dealing with that as a defensive staff to make sure that it doesn't have to get to the head coach's desk. I think that's the right mentality to have. His comment about Mickens not needing any help, he better mean it, and I hope he does. But at the same time, Chris Ash has coached DBs for a long time as well. You're telling me there's nothing Mike Mickens can learn from him? Right? I mean, yes, Mike Mickens, you need to let Mike Mickens do his thing. But great coaches should always love talking about ball with other top coaches. And I'm sure that Mike Mickens has that mentality, as long as it's done the right way. And that's always an interesting dynamic. But he immediately said, like, I'm roaming, which I think is smart, because you have extra coaches now. So you can have your D coordinator roam. Why not have him do it, unless he's like an elite position coach at that? And I've never heard anything about Chris Ash being like a not very good position coach. But I've never heard that he's like this elite position coach either, where you have to have him coach a position. But his experience will be worse. There's going to be times when Mike Mickens is going to have the corners down here going through stuff. And why not have Chris Ash down there working with the safeties on drills? Well, why not? That doesn't mean he's taking over Mike Mickens' job. It means he's taking Marty Biagi's job. And you as a safeties coach, you get what I'm saying? But you still want to have those guys involved, because Mike Mickens can't always be with all five secondary positions at all times, because at times you're doing individual, at times you're doing other things, and you want other eyes on there. Because as a receivers coach, I can assure you, like when I was in offenses, when we were doing 10, 11 personnel, it can be hard as a coach to see all four guys doing something. So I may have the primary read and have our GA looking at the backside read, or I'd say, hey, I'm looking at the primary read now, or hey, this has been an issue for us, and this is a point of emphasis in practice. So I really need to watch that backside dig, because that's the route we're really working on improving. So I need to monitor that. I know that these guys know how to run smash. They've run it a million times, but how's our backside high-low looking? Are we getting the proper spacing? Well, okay, but I didn't watch the smash, so I need to either coach it off film, or I need to have somebody else watching it, those type of things. You always need to have that, and that's going to be there. And that's not undermining Mike Mickens. That's working together well as a team. But you've got to make sure that relationship that's going to be the most important relationship that Chris Ash has, is that him and Mike Mickens are working together well. That's super important. There's some other things he said that I liked, about lessons he's learned over the years. And he talked about he goes, I wasn't looking for this job. That was the most interesting thing that I heard. And I'll save my opinion on what I think that means. But I thought he said, I didn't apply for this job. Marcus Freeman called me. I thought that was really interesting. It backs up what we've said the other day, that this was not a panic hire by Marcus Freeman. Whether you like it or not, this is the direction Marcus Freeman wanted to go after, maybe some early candidates didn't want to, pursue college. And that was interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. It was very interesting. And it makes it easier when you have the same agent, So was this an Urban Meyer pushing him? Was it his agent pushing this? Is it Marcus Freeman having a past relationship when they were both coordinators in the Big Ten at the same time? Like, it raised some interesting questions, but what it answered was what I said. If anyone thought this was a panic move or anything along the lines of that after Marcus Freeman lost on Jim Leonard, like some people said, it completely eliminates any of that talk. Whether you like it or not, this is the direction Marcus Freeman wanted to go, because he pursued him. I also thought it was pretty awesome that I think both coaches said it. I think both coaches noted that Marcus Freeman is the one that picked him up at the airport. I love that. I absolutely love that, because that tells me, like, okay, do you want me here? Like, do you value me? Do you think that I'm a guy that can add something to your room? or not. And I thought that was cool. Like that would have meant so much to me as an assistant coach. And it sounds like Marcus Freeman also initiated the conversation with Jawan Sider as well. Now, again, let's take out whether you like or don't like the hires. What it shows is when openings came up, Marcus Freeman knew exactly where he was going to go with those coaches. I do know that he reached. I'm 99.9% confident he reached out to Jim Leonard. Very confident in that. I know that Jim Knowles reached out to him, but when whatever happened there, and I don't know that Jim Knowles is all that serious of a candidate for Notre Dame. I think that was more media spin to try to drive up and I told you this at the very beginning, Trev. I said I think that's more about him using Notre Dame to drive up the price for wherever he's going to end up. I never felt that he was a serious candidate at Notre Dame. But when you look at, he went from here right to there. Marcus Freeman was focused on what he wanted to accomplish. When Dylan McCullough left, he from what I'm reading, maybe I'm reading too much into what was said yesterday, but didn't it sound like Jawan Sider said he reached out to me? He like Marcus Freeman went after him and basically recruited him to Notre Dame. It didn't sound to me like Dylan McCullough left and Jawan Sider was immediately on the phone like, hey, I want to leave Penn State and come coach. That's not the impression I got. And so both guys saying that tells us that whatever you think of the decisions to hire this coach or that coach or whatever, that's a different conversation for a different day. Marcus Freeman knew exactly where he wanted to go with those hires. And I think that shows something to me. Like he was prepared. If these guys leave, I'm going for these guys. And the Jawan Sider, I think was a home run.
Yeah, for Chris Ash's remarks, I took it more of when I heard him talk about Notre Dame's defense, I took that as more of the standard of play, not schematics. That's how I took it, because he went on, the full quote. He talked about, there's been really good football played here on defense. There's been standards. There's been accountability. They're well coached. We're just going to look at ways to enhance it and make it better conceptually. We're going to keep doing a lot of the same things that have been done here. Terminology might change a little bit. Some fundamentals may change a little bit. But at the end of the day, the way Notre Dame has played defense is the way Notre Dame is going to play defense in the future. And so that, for me, kind of spoke a little bit to it was him kind of covering his butt a little bit of, I am going to come in and make changes. It is, but it is. But I do think that it is. He was talking more the standard on defense that Notre Dame has, not I'm going to run Al Golden's defense and change a couple of things.
I felt later comments were him saying that like he made that comment multiple times, and I'm okay. Just so you know, I'm okay with those comments. That's what you should say in an introductory press conference. I have no problem with anything Chris Ash said. I just thought it was kind of funny because, that guy's not just going to walk in with Al Golden's playbook. Like, okay, here we go. Like that's not what he's doing.
Like his name is crossed out at the top, and it just has Chris Ash on it.
Got Al Golden's name is like sharpied out, or he's like thinking like really, like some tape on there, and you wrote his name in the Sharpie.
It's crossed out, but like it's
why is Coach Golden's notes all up in your playbook? Coach, like, no, mind your business.
I've been told we write the same. It's crazy. Yeah.
But that's okay though. I mean,
yeah,
he needs to coach his way. He doesn't need to be Al Golden. And so we're clear. I want to make sure I was not criticizing him. I just think it's funny when coaches say things like, bruh, we come on. You're not running Al Golden's defense. You're running your defense. Your takeaway is what he should do. There's a standard of excellence. There's a standard of our guys are going to be playing fundamentally sound football, and we're going to play this way, and the expectation is this. But that doesn't mean that I got to run cover one the same amount of times that Al Golden ran cover one.
Sure.
I don't need to blitz the same number of times that Al Golden blitz, and he shouldn't. Al Golden has his 5, 6, 7 favorite blitzes, and Chris Ash may have 5 or 6, 7 of his favorite blitzes that are completely different. And guess what? He should run the ones he likes. Because if you don't quite understand this, then you're not going to know the right times to make those calls and against what looks and things like that. Like if I'm a great smash team on offense, right? I run smash. We're great at smash. We run smash 12 different ways. You come to my campus, Trev, and you learn from smash. We spend a couple hours talking about smash, and you're like, okay, cool. You're not going to be a master at that tomorrow. You know how we run it, but you now then got to go spend the time figuring how it best translates to what you do. Because if you're trying to call smash against certain looks because I called smash against certain looks, then you're not going to quite understand why you're doing it, and you're not going to coach it as well, and it's not going to be as effective. You got to do that works for you guys, but here's what I really like smash. I don't like it out of 3x1. I know you did it, but I like it out of this, or I like it out of that, or whatever. And that's what, it's what kind of makes me laugh, but that's what he should do.
Yeah.
Right. I've always said this, Trev, if you're going to fail being yourself. Don't fail trying to be somebody else. Because if you try to be somebody else, you will fail. You got to be true to yourself. And Chris Ash has to do that too. That doesn't mean that he's going to, the point is he's not going to come in here and be like, okay, this is all garbage. We're not doing this.
Sure.
He's going to run the defense the way he wants to run the defense. And it's maybe it looks a lot like it did last year. Maybe it doesn't. We'll see.
Gerard Rhodes, what is your go-to drill for helping a young quarterback with scanning the field?
I don't really have a drill for that. I think that most drills are segmented for that. I think there's a lot of different things you do with a quarterback for that. Number one is having them watch. I always laugh when coaches talk about mental reps because I'm like, bruh, he's a guard. You have him stand on the sideline. He's taking no mental reps. You can't see what's happening. I was a big fan of when I worked with quarterbacks. I always wanted the backup quarterback or when the starter was out to be behind the offense with me. I know some coaches are like, everybody on the sideline. I'm like, screw that. We're trying to learn something here today. You know what I mean? Like, quarterback, I want you doing this, and I want you thinking about this. So, I mean, just doing it, scanning it. But if you're going to try to do drills, then what you need to do is you need to have drills that aren't as segmented as other drills, where, you have full field reads options, but break it down into segments where what I mean is it's going to be segmented, but it's not, meaning you're not just working on half field reads. I was never a big fan of half field reads as a coach. I never understood it unless you're an offense where it's you're reading the half field read and then you're throwing a check down. But if you have backside routes that the quarterback can go to, then why are we wasting time with half field reads? But I do believe there's a notion of half field reads that are working together that can help a quarterback, where he's working on the half field read and then working on coming back and getting his eyes here, and then maybe you're working on the backside route. So he'll read the front side, but you have the coverage take it away, and that forces him to come back, where you're doing different things like that, where you're dictating the coverage. It's like you ever see an offensive line coach where he's standing behind the offensive line and he's telling the defense, like, okay, you go here and you go there, or it's the same thing here. It's like, you come up, you take this away. I want you to cover the smash, or you design the card to perfectly take away the smash so the quarterback knows to come back. Sometimes you'll design the scout team defense to take everything away. And then what is he going to do? And so there's things like that, but where you're segmenting it, but you're segmenting it together where you still have that. So sometimes what I would do is if I was doing like a half field read, I'm working on smash to the boundary and I've got a backside high low. So I've got my slot running a 15-yard dig and my outside guy running a crosser. So I'm getting that high low. So I would have my backside just kind of get to their spots. And then I would have my quarterback read the actual smash being carried out, and then he'd come back and, see that, and this is where they're going to be, and then you just kind of check it down. Or I may say, hey, look, we're gonna smash this covered, but I want you to experience it's covered. Don't rush back to it, because what can happen, Jared, is if you immediately say, okay, it's covered, he's going to come back way quicker than you want him to come back. So you want the field read to always, or the primary read to always be carried out. And then even if you're focusing on that backside read, because you don't want a quarterback to get in the bad habit of rushing to the backside because he knows the front side read isn't going to be there. But sometimes you can just have the backside read stationary, and then he just has to come back, get your eyes on your read, and those type of things. There's other things I did with young quarterbacks where, I'd have them go through their read, and I'd have a coach standing in a position, and I'd have the coach holding up like fingers, okay, how many? 5, 3, because I want him getting his eyes. I want him finding certain things. Just little silly things like that. I didn't do that a whole lot. That was more what I do with young guys. But those are different things. It's just they got to do it and just have them watch. Just watch all the time. If you've got a game on, hey, talk me through your read as it's going. You got your son's a quarterback, let's say. You're watching an NFL game. All right, tell me what you see pre-snap. Don't do it all the time because you want your kid to enjoy the game. But like if you're actually working on reads, you pop a game in and you start having them talk you through it. What's your pre-snap read? Okay, I'm going here. Okay, at the snap, tell me what he's doing. All right, guys, dropping. So I'm going to be thinking, he's coming up. I'm waiting on that corner route, or he's coming up, but the safety's kind of taking that inside leverage on the corner, so I don't have it. So I need to throw it over the top, or I need to come back to my high-low, or you know what I mean? Like you can work with them on those type of things, but it's just thinking it. Get them to think about it. You want quarterbacks always being challenged mentally. What are you going to do? 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 And that's really the best way to do it. And that's not really a drill per se. They just got to do it and see it on film and watch it on film. Dan Mullen taught me something I did as a coach, Trev. When he was at BG, I spent 2 springs there when they were at BG. And he would have his starting quarterback just take over the film session. And he'd said he'd have some fun with it. He'd walk in there like, man, I can't coach y'all anymore. You guys are driving me crazy. And he'd say, hey, Josh, I think Josh Harris, I think was the name of their quarterback. You lead him through the film session. And he'd just sit in the back. And it was up to Josh Harris to lead them through the film session like he was the coach. Now, they all knew he wasn't mad at him. But the point was, his thing was, he's like, if Josh can't lead the quarterbacks or the offense through the film session of who's supposed to do what, then I haven't taught him the offense the way that he needs to know the offense. I need to see him do it. Now, this would be stuff they do more in the spring and early fall camp. It's not the week before the MAC title game, but it was more about, I need to know that what he knows, because it doesn't matter how smart I am. It matters how smart he is. And that was another lesson that I thought helped me, is making your quarterback lead the other quarterbacks or lead the receivers through film. And that gives you a sense of he knows what to do and where do his eyes go. And then you learn stuff about him. Like, okay, when he's reading this, he doesn't even think about this. Okay, now I need to know either A, I can't be asking him to do that, or B, okay, what do I need to do to work on that? And those are all different things that you can do with your quarterbacks to try to get them going. So hopefully that was helpful. Think that makes sense?
Yeah, made sense to me.
Okay, perfect.
Super chat from JP Poole. Thank you so much for the super chat, JP. I love how many of our recent transfers come from teams who we beat previously. Jeter is a perfect example, who ran a fake field goal against us in a bowl game. # unfinished business.
Yeah, I mean, Riley Leonard played against Notre Dame and played well. Bo Collins had a huge third down catch and beat Benjamin Morrison on third down in a win over Notre Dame. Didn't have as much success against Notre Dame in 2022, but definitely did in 2023. Mitch Jeter, obviously, like you said, was Mitch on the field on that fake? I thought it was more of a punt. Because the camera angle on that, like ESPN was late to the play. I still have not remembered how that went down, but because I'm thinking they're kicking field goal. I'm making notes, and I look up, and the ball snapped. I'm like, what is going on? So I went to look at the TV camera, and ESPN was apparently went through the same thing I did, is they weren't prepared for the fake. You've got like there's been several guys. Jared Dawson is one. Malachi Fields is one. Where they played against these guys. Elijah Hughes is one of those guys. He played against Notre Dame this year in that last game of the regular season. So they've done that a lot with guys. Not all of them. I mean, they didn't play against. They didn't play against Thomas Harper. I know he was at Oklahoma State, but I believe he was injured for the bowl game when they played
They
21.
didn't play against Jordan Clark.
Right, didn't play against Jordan. Didn't play against Brandon Joseph when he transferred in. Didn't play against Chris Mitchell. Didn't play against Jaden. Actually, Jaden Harrison did play against Notre Dame, but he didn't do much in that game in 2022. But they've definitely had some guys that they've looked at and been like, hey, this guy's a pretty good football player. Let's go make a run. He can help us. I don't think it's all you do, but I think that if I'm looking at two guys and I know what this guy's like, because my guys can. Hey, Christian. Hey, Leonard. What was it like covering this guy? How would you compare him to this guy, this guy, this guy? This is what I think, Coach. Like I said, that we talked about this last year. The big reason why they went after Riley Leonard, part of it was the defensive staff was like, we hated preparing for that kid, and we hated playing against that kid. Because it's like you could have the perfect play called, and it just didn't matter. And that was a reason they went after him. So, yeah, I dig that. I dig that.
Yep. I am Tenzin. Good drills for wide receivers. My oldest son has finally taken to football and likes catching and throwing. We did slants and 5-yard ins.
So shoot me an email and I can give you a little bit more. But a lot of things I like to do is I like to work on top ends a ton. And there's a lot of top ends that are similar. So a stop route and a hitch route are going to be very similar top ends. So you'll need to have to run a guy doesn't have to run 12 yards to work on a top end for a stop all the time. But I like things where you're focusing on the get off. I'm a believer at receiver that you start and it's like building blocks. The first thing I need to know if my receivers can get into a proper stance. And so every single day we would work on stance and starts. Get into a good stance and not be lazy with it. Don't just, okay, we got to go through the motions, but get in a good stance. Be efficient. Limit the amount of like just extra stuff, right? You want them to be efficient coming off the ball. You want, look, I mean, there's this, I have to get from here to here as fast as possible. If I'm sinking my hips and changing my feet and dropping my hands before I take a single step downfield, then I've lost a step. So getting them in proper stance, I would always do 5-yard get-offs where they got to come and either go vertical and work around me as a group. So you kind of go at a cone and then you go around it. I would have them work attacking leverage one way. So they have a cone, kind of 2 yards to their left, 2 yards to the right at 5 yards, work on attacking that, then get vertical, stride through it, really focus on getting that first step, getting that big first step off the line against off coverage. Then we'd work on stance and starts versus man coverage. Then we'd work on releases against, aggressive off coverage. So a reroute attempt from a slot defender, a reroute attempt from a cover 2 corner, of how to handle those things. Then I do a lot on top ends. A lot of my focus is on efficiency. So 5-yard drills, get to the top of that cone, having a guy understand when am I going through it, when am I not. Cones are beneficial for technique drills, but you always need to build in a part of that drill later that doesn't involve a cone or a bag, because otherwise guys start using the cones and the bags as sort of a crutch. And when they don't have the bag or the cone, they don't quite know where the 6-yard mark is or whatever. If you're someone who teaches off yards, if you're someone who teaches off steps, that's fine. I never loved teaching off steps outside a quick game because, 3 steps for Malachi Fields is going to look a whole lot different than 3 steps for Jaden Harrison. It's just, and that can jack with the quarterback a little bit from a timing standpoint or a depth standpoint, but it just depends on the type of route you're going to do. The really quick 1-step and throw stuff, that can be off of timing. But other things, I'm more like a 12-yard stop route. I want that to be a 12-yard stop route. I don't want it to be 5 steps, because 5 steps for a smaller guy or a guy like Will Fuller who has naturally shorter strides is not going to get the corner out of his pedal. I want to push him out of his pedal. I've seen coaches that it's a 10-yard route. I'm like, well, no, it shouldn't be a 10-yard route. It needs to be a 13-yard route, because at 10 yards, they're just going to squat on it right at 10. You need to run through 10 to get that corner to flip his hips, and then you come and get down. So like a lot of that kind of stuff. But the big thing for me is exaggerating the hip movement. What young receivers need to understand that most don't is your feet are not your brakes. They're not your brakes. Your feet are simply the tires, right? So when you're thinking about driving a car, your tires stop you, but you don't get out of the car and grab your tires and use them to stop, right? They are it's the brakes. You've got to slam on the brakes to stop your car. Well, what are the brakes of a receiver? It's not your feet, because if it's your feet, you're going to get choppy. It's your hips. And so I would really exaggerate driving your hips down at your top end. And I mean, you're getting chest to knee to toe, and really driving your hips down. You're not going to do that quite as much when you're doing a live drill. It'll be more natural where you get that 1-2. But if you try to use your feet and your hands, you're going to get super choppy, and you're going to have big time tells. Your hips, run, slam, drive your hips down, and then explode out of your brake. That's a big thing for me, and emphasizing that on all my stop routes or my double moves. Speed cuts, I don't care as much about. That's a different type of route, but any kind of dig, any kind of stop, any type of comeback, any type of hitch, those are all things we're going to do. Properly using your upper body to manipulate a defender. Studying your defender is obviously something you need to do, but like a lot of top ends where I'm really focusing on that. I also am someone who believes if you're doing a drill that doesn't have them catching the football, you're kind of wasting your time outside of blocking drills. Like even our get off stuff, I want my guys catching the ball whenever possible. Another thing when it comes to catching the ball is work on catching the ball when it's not right to you. Look, there'd be things we do. I've said this before where, I'd have my guys there on their knees and I throw that ball low, and they got to work on getting their hands down and really rolling as much as they can once they make the catch to try to get that ball off the ground. Work on back shoulders, work on low and away, work on catching it off your hip, do all those things to kind of get them to work on that. Here's another thing too that I think is great for hand-eye coordination. Obviously you don't catch the ball. You want them to, you want a receivers. It's kind of like the movie The Patriot, right? One of my favorite lines from there is aim small, miss small. And I've talked about how I've used that for myself when I'm going to the range. What's your sure? I'm aiming for that circle in the middle. No, aim for the center of the circle. Aim small, miss small. Same thing with catching the football. You don't look at the football. What are you looking at? Looking at the tip. I'm trying to catch the front part of the ball. But one thing that I did when I was a kid, and I had very good hands, Trev. That's why I, ended up moving a receiver at some point in time, because I could really catch the ball. But I'd get into my room at night, and once it got dark and I could adjust to the dark, I'd throw the ball up in the air and catch it 500 times before I go to bed. Because if you're trying to catch a football, you're laying on your back and you're throwing a ball straight up in the air. If you're not focusing on that football, you will get hit in the face. But when you're doing that in the dark, and again, when I say dark, it's once your eyes have adjusted to the dark. You know what I'm saying? So like, don't shut the door, turn the light off, and start throwing the ball up in the air. You're going to get hit in the face. But once you've adjusted to the dark, then you start throwing the ball up in the air and catching it and focusing it, because that's when you get really zeroed in on the football. I'm a big fan of that. If you want to work on hands, a lot of people will work on catching a tennis ball. That's good. That's fine. I really like basketball drills, because I think basketball drills are great at strengthening your fingers, just like rapid fire against a wall. I'd have my guys dribble the basketball, because it just works on your fingers being loose and flexible and things like that. I think that was always something that we would do a lot of, just to work on just your hands, your hand-eye coordination, things along those lines. Catching a basketball up against a wall really fast makes your hands stronger. It also stretches them out, where not stretches them out like they're going to be longer, but they're more flexible, where there's more give, because your hands need to be soft. Like, I don't want hard hands. I don't want you like this. You go out and catch the ball. It's soft, right? There's some examples I've used that are probably not appropriate for the show, but basically it's like, if you throw a football up against a brick wall, what's going to happen, Trev? Sucker's going to bounce right off. Put a big old king-size mattress up against that wall and throw it in the king-size mattress. Is it going to bounce off the same way it did? No, because there's more give, right? There's a softer platform. We don't want that pop when you catch a football. You want it to be soft, which means you can't have like really strong hands. You need to go get the ball and attack the ball. Those are all things that I think you can work on, and they're all stuff you can do as a young person to start getting better at just your hands, your feet, change your directions, all that kind of stuff are all things that you can do to improve your skill. So I hope that helps.
J.C. Bodie, Urlacher picks up his pass coverage and starts to look like he has Watts potential. It's kind of like a bicycle.
I think they're very different players.
Yeah.
I think they're very different players. If he picks up pass coverage, he's more a Don Shula than he is Xavier Watts. I mean, Kennedy is a guy that's always going to be a downhill thumper. Xavier was a very good tackler. Xavier was not a punishing tackler. He was not going to come down and lay you out. Kennedy can lay you out. He's more a Don Shula than he is Xavier Watts. I'm not trying to compare anybody to Xavier Watts. He might be the best safety that ever played Notre Dame. What I need Kennedy to do is just be a good all-around player. And I think he's smart, but sometimes guys, man, this was Tom Zibikowski's problem. He was wants to just come down and he wanted to lay you out. He was a boxer. He wanted to come deliver punishment. And it was a mindset thing you can never kind of get him out of. You want to try to get that out of Kennedy if possible, where there's a time and a place to come down and lay somebody out. Don Shula showed you that in the Georgia game. But there's got to be times when you're patient, you're staying back, you're reading routes, and you're driving on football. And that's what made Don a really good player this past year. He knew when to be patient, when to stay back, when to do that, and that's what allowed him to be effective. So if Kennedy can pick up pass coverage, I think him and Don are very similar players. Very similar players. Much more so than Xavier Watts, who's more of a coverage first, being in great position, smart, but not a guy that's going to come down and just lay you out. That's kind of my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I appreciate the question. It's just Kennedy Urlacher is just not a good comp over. If Kennedy Urlacher reaches his ceiling, he's just not a good comp for Xavier Watts because they're two different players. That's where I'm at with it.
All right.
Kevin Park, is there anyone on the O-line side that could help if moved to the defensive side of the ball?
No. Look, I feel like every year there's always this, when they move someone from the offense to the defense, and going all the way back to like Chris Stewart back in the Charlie Weiss era, there's plenty of bodies, there's plenty of talent, there's plenty of size on the defensive side of the ball on the D-line. They need to just coach those guys up. Like Charles Jagasaw was a pretty good defensive lineman in high school, but I don't want to waste. He needs to focus on playing offensive line, not playing defense. And if he goes to defense, maybe he could help you out, but now you've hindered your offensive line. You could look at your backups and guys like that. And I mean, if there's an offensive lineman on the current roster that you move to defensive line who's better than the defensive lineman you had, then you are either not coaching them well or you're a bad evaluator. That just should not be. Not at this stage. If you're going to make that kind of move, you make it before they start, like Jerry Tillery, who was recruited offensive lineman but moved to defense. But that decision was made before he enrolled at Notre Dame. It wasn't made midway through his career. And it doesn't mean guys can't move. Jerron Jones went and played professional football, and they moved him to the offensive line. But that decision was made as soon as he got into professional football. They have plenty of talent and plenty of depth on the defensive line. They just got to coach those guys up, and those guys got to put in the work to be ready to play. It really is that simple. It really is that simple, Trev.
Develop the talent you have in the room.
That's right.
Tommy Guns, for Logan Thomas, a comp just jumped into my head. Not sure if it would make sense other than being on the slider side for the position they play. Barkevius Mingo.
Honestly, I didn't watch a ton of Barkevius Mingo to be completely honest with you. I've always kind of felt a guy. I like React because didn't he play for LSU? Am I completely nuts? Didn't Barkevius Mingo play for LSU, or am I confusing him with someone else? He played at LSU, correct? Sure. But yeah, he did. I just looked that up. The guy that I always thought he kind of reminded me of is a guy that's interestingly been a much better. I mean, I guess trying the way to say it. His skill set reminds me a lot of I don't even know. Is it Danielle Hunter? Is his name? It's
Oh,
spelled
Danielle
Danielle.
Hunter.
Yeah. He's always kind of reminded me a little bit more of him. You could be right about Barkevius Mingo, Tommy. I just don't really remember him as well. I remember being long and a twitchy kind of. I just don't remember him a ton. So I'd have to go back and watch him a little bit more. But yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to watch film on him. I'm with you.
Speaking
Reese
of LSU
Bryant.
D lineman, did you see that Bo Davis just got hired by the Saints?
By the Saints.
That's a tough time to be losing an assistant coach.
Mm-hmm.
That sucks.
Reese Briner, hopefully making my first trip to South Bend, probably the Navy game. Can I get a good spot with a general admission ticket, or should I try to get a reserve spot? Also, what are the can't miss stops in South Bend?
I didn't know that you could get a general admission ticket. I thought all of them had seats.
I think, Reese, are you talking about a parking spot? Because it's in Notre Dame Stadium, it's every seat is you buy a seat. Like it's you go to section 33, row 20, seat 17. Like that's how the stadium is set up. So if you're talking about parking lots and tailgating, if you want to spend the money, you can go to the stadium lot or the Joyce lot. I would say go to the Joyce lot because you're essentially in the same lot. You're in the same area for, like, depending on the game, hundreds of dollars cheaper. And then must hit spots. Depends on what you like to do. On campus, definitely check out the grotto. The player walk typically starts 2.5 hours before kickoff. So I would check that out. Around campus, there's a bunch of fun stuff to do around Eddy Street. That's kind of where I'd be at. It just depends on what you
spend
like
as
to do.
much time on campus as possible. If it's your first trip to South Bend, spend as much time on campus as possible. Go to the bookstore, go to the grotto, go to, try to do the trumpets under the dome. If they have a pep rally, do the pep rally. I mean, just be on campus as much as you can. If there's other sporting events going on that weekend, and a lot of times there are. Friday night, there's a lacrosse soccer game. Hold on. Soccer's in the fall, right?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't soccer in the fall? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's something else going on campus. Go check those out. Late in the year, sometimes hockey, I think, starts late in the year, correct? If those things are available, but just spend as much time as you can on campus. Food wise, I mean, there's a lot of cool places. The one place that I think is kind of the most, you got to go if you can. And if you can get there on Friday, Rocco's is kind of a traditional place that a lot of people go to, but there's a lot of good food spots in town. But those are the ones that I look at, Trev, and I feel like those are the best spots for if you're someone who wants tradition type of thing. But just spend as much time as you can on campus. That's my big thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's mine. I like that. All right. By the way, before every season, we put a thing out on Irish Breakdown that Andrew McDonough does, where he talks about all the different things to do on campus, and you can always look for that, ask for that. We can send it to you. There's all types of stuff that's there to do on campus as well.
Eric O'Brien, what happened with Vernon? He's lost on the depth chart. Not coach's favorite. Thought he was going to be a dude.
He's still just a redshirt freshman. I mean, he's going into his redshirt sophomore year. I think it's a little bit too early to be like, what happened with that guy? It's not like he's a fifth-year senior. There's not a lot I can say publicly on that one, other than just I don't know that he's someone who that's a better message board question. But he's not someone that I think is necessarily going to get much of a push. He's going to have to really work his tail off and outperform, maybe even a little better than others have to outperform to have that shot. I think my issue is I think he's being misused. I have always felt he should be a big end, a big power end, get him to 265, 270 and let him just kind of be that physical edge. If you get over to if you're getting over to like his freshman year, I think it was BC, his freshman year, a couple games from 23 where I felt like it's 23 where I felt like he was playing on the edge, I'm like, man, this guy could be a really good defensive end. And so I think that I just don't think he's a D tackle. I think he's an end. That's the big thing for me. So there's not a lot I can say here. So yeah.
ICURN with Irish Luck. Making sure there is a true competition at quarterback will be important to how the passing game looks in 2025 and how good the wide receiver class of 26 finishes.
100%. Yeah, I mean, you play the best guy, not the guy that has some arbitrary thing that you think is important that doesn't actually result in who plays better. Experience can lead to you playing better. I'm not dismissing experience, but if you have experience and this other guy's playing better, but you're going to go with this guy because he's more experienced, then that's not a real competition. Because the experienced guy would have to just be awful for him not to play. That's not how you win. That's not how you win. Like unless your experience is like, again, to compare the Clemson 2018 versus the Notre Dame 2025 situations is just worthless because the kid that made 4 starts before Trevor Lawrence took over was a guy that the year before started the entire season and led them to the college football playoffs. It wasn't some guy that just started a bowl game and came off for a series in a playoff game and led you to a field goal. Not that dismisses, none of that's a knock on Steve, but that's what he's done compared to a guy that literally started every game in a season before and led you to the playoffs. It's just a different animal.
Yep. Tommy Guns. Brian, when do you feel like Irish Breakdown finally broke out? Was it a specific covered event or a series of events?
I think it was a series of events, but it was built around the same thing. It was when Brian Kelly left. And we were showing good growth. We had launched our website that June of 21. July of 21 is when we first had people signing up for the message board. And, that was our first year doing live shows and stuff like that. And when Brian Kelly left, we did a show immediately. And it was, I still think it's our second or third biggest show we've ever done, if not first. And for whatever reason, there's just a lot of people that just popped up on their radar. And we went from, we had a few thousand subscribers and it just took off. We went from like 600 people had signed up for the message board from July to November, just above our growth numbers. And it just exploded after that on our message board. Our podcast numbers exploded. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one is we went live right when it happened. And we were the only podcast that went live when it happened. And the other part is that I think a lot of people, I've said this before, there's some people who don't like me because I was negative during the Kelly era, who still don't like me because I was negative during the Kelly era, who now just do nothing but bash Kelly. But in their heads, they can't get past that I was negative on the program because they can't be negative on the current. They have to everything is awesome. I can't deal with anyone being negative. I can only be negative on things that aren't there anymore. That's why I always laugh when I hear we tried to tell you, who's this we thing? There's 2-3 people that were ripping Kelly in any kind of public platform at all. And now everybody knew Kelly was not the guy at Notre Dame. I'm like, well, I got a lot of DMs and tweets and stuff that tell you that that's not what most people felt. But what happened is you saw a lot of people that were upset about how he left that kind of gravitated to my site because I was very negative on Brian Kelly for a host of reasons. And then what you also saw that helped us out a lot is a lot of other people that cover the team helped us grow, because when they started repeating the stuff that I had been saying for years, a lot of people, and I've heard, and this isn't my opinion, this is what I've been told hundreds of times. When they started regurgitating stuff that you had said that they mocked you for when Kelly was the head coach, then they started repeating it to criticize him after he left. We knew that all along the stuff you were saying was true and everybody knew it, but you were the only one that would say it. I've been told that hundreds of times by people. That's why I came to Irish Breakdown, is because I realized then that all these other people would make fun of you and talk trash about you and run their mouth about this or that or the other thing. And turns out you were right again. And then they all started agreeing with you and saying what you said, but it was after the fact. So they knew that they were all lying. Not all. I'm being hyperbolic because, again, I wasn't the only person that was that way. But that had a big impact in it as well. And that's not my opinion. That's what people have told me. I can tell you the event caused our numbers to skyrocket. But I'm telling you, why did it cause me to skyrocket? That I don't know. I'm just telling you what people have told me about why they came. And so, like you'll still hear some people like, oh, he doesn't have connections. He doesn't do this. And I just kind of laugh. And the people that are actually watch the show all the time will laugh because they know, I'll say, hey, this is what's going on. There's a problem at receiver. The receiver coach is a problem. Oh, you're a hater. And then Marcus Freeman's fires Chancey Stuckey the day after the season is over with. And once again, we were right. You know what I mean? And I think it's stuff like that over time that we've built up enough credibility by just kind of being right a lot. Not always, but right a lot that says, hey, A, I know what I'm talking about. B, we have pretty good connections inside the program that I think people finally were like, okay, a lot of stuff that I had been told about this guy or this site is just it's BS. And so I think those things have helped us build. But that was the event. And then when Marcus Freeman was hired, so funny story, we actually broke that on my site. So we broke Marcus Freeman being hired. I instead of putting it, so you talk about how I am not a clickbait guy, I could have wrote a front page story about Marcus Freeman because I was told it was done, and he was going to be the head coach. And so, but instead of putting it on Twitter or on a free story where I could make a lot of money, put it on the message board. I put it on the premium board and did it that way. And because I wanted the people that are actually support us with, financially support us to get that news first. That helped also because then other people had to start reporting, Brian Driscoll's reporting, that kind of thing. A lot of local people were doing that. So that it was that moment of Kelly leaving to Freeman being hired, our numbers exploded.
Sweet.
So that was the period of time where we really took off. And since then, it's just been kind of a steady growth. So, yeah, that's it.
There we go.
Trev, when was the first time you heard of Irish Breakdown? Do you remember when that was?
Your first show after the 2020 Alabama.
Seriously? You were one of the OGs? Wow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I've been listening since day one.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
I met two other guys at the tailgate this year, and I wish I could remember their names. But two other guys at the tailgate this year, they're like, yeah, dude, first time I watched your show was your post-game, your Alabama post-game. It wasn't even really a show. It was a rant.
I know, and I needed it. Well, how I found I went through and I was trying to find Brian Kelly's press conference because I wanted to hear whatever BS he had to say about the game. And I just typed in Notre Dame, Alabama post-game conference or press conference, and the show popped up. And I was like, well, let's see what this is about. And, yeah, been listening ever since.
That's funny. That's awesome. We got to listen now. We have no choice.
Well, I don't listen anymore.
Just
Archer.
you out. And just when your mouth stops moving, I know it's my time to talk.
When there's been a long enough awkward silence, I'll just jump in and start talking about Eli Raridan. Archer 452. Do you think we'll ever see a defensive-only player ever win the Heisman in the future?
It's possible. I mean, it's possible. I could see a guy just having like a monster year, and it's one of those years where we're like, there's no like this would have been a great year for a defensive-only guy to win it. Because you only had like one elite offensive player, like in Genti, who's a running back at Boise State. Like let's say, Julius Peppers or an Ndamukong Suh would be a good example. Yeah. This maybe could have been a year where a guy like an Ndamukong Suh, who was, what did he finish, like second or third? This would have been a year where if Manti Te'o, if Drake Bowen, no, it wouldn't have been a good example because Manti had already built up a reputation. But let's say Manti Te'o was a 5-star recruit who came to Notre Dame, and his first year was 21 and 22 and 23, and he was real productive like Manti was. and then coming into this 2024 season has exactly the same kind of season that Manti does. Notre Dame's undefeated. They're in the playoffs. He has 7 interceptions, over 100 tackles, big plays. The national TV game against, so-and-so, that's a big moment. He has that diving interception to beat Texas A&M in the opener like he did against Oklahoma. Then I think that guy would have won the Heisman this year because there's no great quarterbacks this year. He would have got it over like a Dylan Gabriel, in my opinion. Might have got it over Nash and Genty. And Manti didn't get it. I know a lot of people are upset that he didn't get it in 2012, but I would have been fine with Manti getting it in 2012. Totally fine with it. But it's not like Johnny Manziel, who I despise, wasn't also phenomenal. He threw for 3,700 yards, rushed for 1,400 yards, and had 47 touchdowns. Like, I get it.
Yeah.
But there was no player like Johnny's production this year.
Mm-hmm.
It was Dylan Gabriel and Cam Ward. Those guys, and their teams were like, Dylan Gabriel's team was really good, but he wasn't like super crazy numbers. Cam had some really good numbers, but his team wasn't great. So I think this would have been a year where if there was a Manti Te'o-like season for like the number 1 or number 2 team, like that, this year is a year where you could have seen something like that happen. It would have had, but it's got to be like the perfect storm type of situation. There's no elite quarterbacks with crazy numbers. Guy has like some ridiculous, like big game production and big moments and big storyline and all that other kind of stuff. I think it's possible in a year like that. Like if there was an Ndamukong Suh type D tackle this year, you could see something like that. Like what year was it that Ndamukong Suh? Wasn't it the 2009? Was it 09 when Ndamukong Suh was finished second in Heisman voting, or what year? He was 4th, and so he was 4th in 09, and he had he had 12 sacks, something like 21 tackles for loss, 12 sacks. I could have seen something like that. If there was like an Aaron Donald type of player, although Aaron Donald didn't get like the same love he should have, but Aaron Donald in 2013 was like a monster. But if Aaron Donald would have played at let's be honest, Aaron Donald was not considered a Heisman candidate in 2013 because he played at Pitt.
Yeah.
He had 29 tackles for loss and 11 sacks. Like, he was phenomenal. If he would have, like, let's say Riley Mills would have had that type of numbers this year, and then he might have had a shot. So, like, I think it's possible. Or if let's say like Tyleik Williams had that kind of number for Ohio State, or Oregon had that kind of guy, or you know what I mean? Like Georgia had that kind of guy, those kind of crazy numbers. I think it's possible. So, I mean, it's unlikely, but I do think it's possible that could happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with that. Andrew Gilmore, do you think Aeneas Williams is affected the most by McCullough's departure? Dylan really liked Williams, gave him way more snaps than I expected.
No, I don't think so. I mean, based on what Coach Sider said yesterday, he talked about how important it is to pass pro. He's like, if you can't pass block, man, like, you can't play for me, basically. So, and he talked about Aeneas making those plays in the bowl game against him. He's like, man, we look up and Aeneas is out there and he's running we see him match up against a linebacker. Next thing you know, he's catching the ball 40 yards down. I think he has a track record of playing multiple backs. So I don't think Aeneas played this year because Dylan McCullough loved him. I think Dylan McCullough loved him because of the way he performed in earning that opportunity.
Yeah.
And I would assume that Juwan Sider, Coach Sider, is going to feel the same exact way. I don't know that he's hurt by it. I don't. It could happen, but I don't. I just want to fly through a few more of these, Trev, because we're getting close to that hour, and there's a couple that I want to get to. But yeah.
If Notre Dame had the 09 offense with the 2024 defense, would Notre Dame have won the Natty?
No, they would have probably still lost the championship game, because if not sooner. Because if you think this year's offensive line had some issues against Penn State, could you imagine what the 09 offensive line would have done against Penn State? That offensive line was a mess.
Yeah, I don't want to think
about it.
An absolute
mess.
Don't want to think about it.
So I think that would have been their downfall. The offensive line was a problem in 09. So, but that team would have would have gone 12-0. They would have probably been the 5 seed. They would have slaughtered Clemson. I think they would have probably beat Arizona State pretty convincingly, and then how would they have done it against Ohio State in the semifinals? Probably the same way that they lost in the championship game. It would have just been a little different. I think it'd have been a higher scoring game. Like the final score might have been the same, but it would have been more back and forth. At the end of the day, in big moments, they were going to get to Jimmy because the offensive line was a problem. That's how I think. That's how I think it would have gone down. But that team would have had a shot, though. They would have had a shot, though, Trev, because Jimmy was unreal and throwing in the postseason to Floyd and Tate and Rudolph, and that'd have been a lot of fun. That'd have been a whole lot of fun. And especially if I could have Mike Denbrock as the OC still, because I think Mike Denbrock would love coaching a guy like Jimmy Clausen.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Running back would have been a question for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, Armando and Robert Hughes. I think that was more of a Charlie issue, to be completely honest with you. You had Sear Wood, you had Theo Riddick, you had Robert Hughes, you had Armando Allen. I just don't think Charlie used him very well because of how much he loved throwing to Jimmy, and I don't think that the offensive line was all that great, to be honest with you. Yeah. But heck, you know who their number 3 leading rusher was on that team, Trev?
Golden Tate.
That's right. That team was so loaded. Oh my! But they only averaged 128.3 rushing yards a game and 3.8 yards per carry. Like, they gave up a lot of sacks. They weren't great at opening up running lanes. If you could say, give me the 09 pass offense, let me keep the current offensive line and running backs. Just give me, if you could just say, if I could just have the 09 guys, quarterback and receivers. This team's 16-0, and I don't know that they play a close game in the postseason.
Shoot, I'd take the tight end too. I'd take 09 Kyle Rudolph.
But like, I'm not even trying to be greedy. Because of, I'm just saying, give me the quarterback and receivers. But if you give me the tight end, that's even more pro Notre Dame, because I think he's a better player than Mitchell Evans. But yeah, that team would be hard to beat. Very hard to beat. Oh my goodness. A couple more before we get out of here. Tommy Reese, Tommy Guns. Normally the debate is between hot pizza and cold pizza, but where does room temperature sit compared to those other two? That's just lazy. Like, at least cold pizza, there's an intentionality behind it, but if you're just going to have room temperature pizza, man, just pop it in the toaster oven for a minute. Room temperature, that just seems like kind of like just lazy. Like, no. And then I'm going to skip his near-death experience question and the appetizer question for another day, Tommy. But I wanted to get to this one down here. Jason Rose asked about the analysts were hired, Javon Codlin and Dom Spalding. Where I have not heard a ton about them. I don't know, or about Dom Spalding. I haven't heard a whole lot about him. I know that his brother coaches college football. I like his pedigree of who he's worked for. I did reach out to somebody that covers West Virginia about Javon Codlin, and they are very high on him. And obviously still evolving as a coach, still young as a coach, but raved about his recruiting ability. So that'll be a nice addition to the room. And he's coached corners. He can work with safeties. And so that'll be good. He can someone that if Mike Mickens wants to work with safeties one day, you now have a guy that can kind of help the corners and lead them through drills and things like that. So that'll be helpful. But from what I've been told about them so far, they seem like very strong hires. And as far as where things are with the recruiting coordinator hire, I don't know where they are. I was told that somebody reported 3 names last night. I reached out to a pretty good source. They're like, yeah, that's not right. That's false. So I honestly don't know where they are. And so I just wanted to kind of get to that one. So that's going to do it, Trev. We went a little bit over an hour. I just wanted to get people just a couple more, since the first couple went forever. I wanted to get a few more in there. before we got out of here. But that's going to do it, man. So why don't Trev, why don't you take us out of here, man?
Yeah, you got it. Well, hey, listen, folks, really good show today. Good submissions towards the end there. Brian and I are going to continue talking about Notre Dame spring practices, expectations, potential breakout players, things of those nature up until we get to the blue gold game, when we are actually going to have some substance of, hey, this is what we thought came true. This is where we were right. There's going to be a lot of different pieces of content that we're going to be putting out. You can find all that on the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. But before you head out of here, folks, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. And whatever platform you watch us on, please be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it, whether that be on Spotify podcasts or Apple podcasts. But until tomorrow, when we have the Friday free-for-all mailbag, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We will see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.